Hey guys, tonight we're slipping through stone corridors lit only by flickering torches, where a queen's heartbeat drowns out the distant sound of her husband's laughter echoing from the banquet hall below. You're standing in her private chamber, watching her hands tremble as she breaks the wax seal on a letter that could destroy everything she's built, everything she's supposed to be. The parchment smells of rosemary and risk. Outside her window, the kingdom sleeps, unaware that their queen is about to make a choice that will ripple through centuries of whispered scandal and romantic legend. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why certain royal lineages suddenly shifted, why some queens vanished from official records, or why medieval poets wrote such achingly specific ballads about forbidden palace love. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, or maybe share if you've ever visited a medieval castle and imagined the secrets those walls could tell. Your engagement helps this channel grow, and I read every single comment you leave. Now let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You're living in an age when queens aren't really people, they're chess pieces. Diplomatic instruments wrapped in silk and jewels. But you, this particular queen, have just remembered you're human. It started 6 months ago, maybe 7, when you first noticed him across the crowded Great Hall during the Feast of St. Michael. Your husband the king was boasting about a recent military victory, his voice carrying over the roasted venison and spiced wine. And you were doing what you always do, smiling at the right moments, nodding when appropriate, your face a practiced mask of royal contentment. Then your eyes met his. Just for a heartbeat, just long enough for something inside your chest to crack open like spring ice on a frozen river. You told yourself it meant nothing. You're a queen. You've been trained since childhood to ignore your own desires, to serve the realm, to produce heirs and maintain alliances. Your marriage wasn't arranged, it was negotiated like a trade agreement for wool and timber. 3 years you've been married now, 3 years of performing the role of devoted wife while your husband divides his attention between governing, hunting, and a rotating selection of prettier, younger ladies in waiting. He's not cruel to you. That almost makes it worse. He's simply indifferent. The way a man might be indifferent to a well-made piece of furniture that serves its purpose adequately. But this other man, you've learned his name now. Though speaking it aloud feels dangerous even in your private thoughts, he looks at you like you're not a crown or a womb or a alliance sealer. He looks at you like you're a woman, like you're interesting, like you're worth knowing beyond your title and your bloodline. Tonight, you've received his 3rd letter. The first one appeared tucked beneath your prayer book in the chapel, just a few lines wondering if you'd noticed the way starlings gather at sunset on the eastern tower. The second arrived folded inside your embroidery basket, commenting on how your laugh during the Easter festivities sounded like church bells. He'd clearly been watching you from across the courtyard. This 3rd letter is bolder. He suggested a meeting. Not in some shadowy corridor or hidden alcove. Not yet. But in the herb garden tomorrow afternoon when your husband will be hunting in the royal forest. Just to talk, he writes. Just to know whether I've imagined this connection or whether you feel it too. Your hands shake as you hold the parchment. You should burn it. You should report him to your husband's chamberlain. You should do what every sermon and every law and every cautionary tale demands of the queen in your position. Instead, you press the letter against your chest and close your eyes, memorizing the elegant slope of his handwriting, the faint scent of ink and perhaps his own hands that touched this page before you did. Do you understand yet what you're risking? Let me paint you a picture. Medieval queens who commit adultery or even get accused of adultery face trials that range from public humiliation to execution. In England, 2 of Henry VIII's wives will eventually lose their heads partly on adultery charges, though that's still in your future timeline. In France, the Tour de Nesle affair saw 3 princesses imprisoned after their affairs were discovered. Their alleged lovers tortured and executed in ways that still make historians wince when reading the chronicles. Your own kingdom's laws are explicit. A queen's body belongs to the realm because her children must be the king's legitimate heirs. Adultery isn't just a sin, it's treason against the crown, against succession, against the very fabric of royal authority. But here's what the laws and the priests and the chroniclers never quite capture: the suffocating weight of being a woman with a mind and a heart and desires, trapped in a role that treats you as a beautiful, talking incubator. You've done everything right. You've been pious, attending Mass twice daily, endowing churches, distributing alms to the poor. You've been dutiful, learning to manage the royal household accounts, mediating disputes among the noble ladies, hosting banquets that strengthen your husband's political alliances. You've been patient through 3 years of your husband's obvious affairs, including the current one with that blonde girl from Burgundy who giggles like a drunk goose. And you're tired. God, you're so tired of being good. Here's a quirky detail that might surprise you. Medieval queens actually had more privacy than you might imagine, which made affairs slightly less impossible than Hollywood suggests. Queens maintained separate household staffs from the king, with their own chambers, their own ladies-in-waiting, their own daily schedules. While you couldn't exactly vanish for days without explanation, you could absolutely spend hours in the garden, or the chapel, or your solo without your husband knowing or particularly caring what you were doing. The constant surveillance you see in modern movies, that's somewhat exaggerated. Most medieval kings were too busy with warfare, governance, and their own extramarital adventures to monitor their wives' every movement. The real danger wasn't your husband watching you, it was everyone else: the servants, the nobles, the ladies-in-waiting who'd sell information for advancement or out of genuine moral outrage. You stand now at your window, looking down at the darkened herb garden where tomorrow you might meet him. The moon is nearly full, painting everything in silver and shadow. Somewhere in the castle, a dog barks. Someone laughs, probably servants finishing their evening duties. Your world feels simultaneously enormous and crushingly small. Historians still argue whether queens like you genuinely fell in love or simply sought emotional refuge from loveless political marriages. Some scholars paint medieval royal affairs as purely transactional women seeking protection, men seeking advancement, everyone playing power games disguised as romance. Other historians, reading surviving love letters and poetry, insist that medieval people felt emotions just as complex and genuine as we do today, that reducing royal affairs to pure calculation strips away the messy, beautiful humanity of people who lived 800 years ago. You suspect the truth is both. Yes, you're drawn to him partly because he represents everything your marriage lacks: attention, genuine interest, the thrill of being chosen rather than assigned. But also, genuinely, your heart speeds up when you see him. Your skin feels electric when you imagine his hands. When you read his letters, you laugh out loud, alone in your chambers, at his observations about court life, his gentle mockery of the pompous nobles, his descriptions of the countryside beyond the castle walls. He makes you remember you used to love poetry, used to sneak away to read romances about knights and ladies before your marriage when you still believed love might be possible. Tomorrow afternoon, you'll go to the herb garden. You've already decided. even though part of you is screaming that this is madness, that you're jeopardizing everything for what might be nothing more than a flirtation, a distraction, a fantasy that will curdle into disaster. But the other part of you, the part that's been dormant since your wedding day, is waking up like bulbs pushing through frozen earth in early spring. You fold his letter carefully and hide it in the secret compartment of your jewellery casket, where you've already concealed the first 2 letters. Then you kneel at your prie-dieu and try to pray. But the words that come aren't asking forgiveness. They're asking for courage, for clarity, for just one afternoon where you can be yourself instead of symbol. The candles burn lower. The castle settles into sleep around you. And you, queen of this realm, diplomat's daughter, king's wife, potential mother of future monarchs, close your eyes and let yourself imagine what it might feel like to be, just for an hour, simply a woman meeting a man who sees her. Tomorrow, everything changes. You weren't always a queen, and you certainly weren't always this lonely. Let's rewind. Let me show you how you ended up in this gilded cage wearing a crown that feels heavier every year. You're 14 years old, standing in your father's council chamber while men discuss your future as though you're a particularly valuable horse they're considering selling. Your father is a duke. Powerful enough to matter, but not powerful enough to refuse when a king comes calling with a marriage proposal. The messenger from the royal court has been talking for what feels like hours, listing the advantages of this union trade agreements, military alliances, access to coastal ports your father's lands desperately need. You're wearing your best gown, the blue one with the silver embroidery, and you've been instructed to smile pleasantly and say nothing unless directly addressed. Nobody asks if you want to marry the king. That question doesn't exist in your world. Marriage for people like you isn't about want, it's about strategy, about strengthening families, about moving pieces across the great chessboard of medieval politics. Your mother married your father the same way, and her mother before that, stretching back through generations of women who shaped history by producing the right children at the right time with the right bloodlines. Here's what they tell you about your future husband. He's 28, so 14 years older than you, which everyone assures you is perfectly appropriate. He's reasonably handsome, not disfigured or grotesquely fat, which apparently you should consider lucky. His first wife died 2 years ago in childbirth along with a baby, a tragedy that left the kingdom without an heir and the king needing a new queen. He's known to be pious, attending mass regularly. He's a capable military commander who's successfully defended the realm against incursions from neighbouring kingdoms. He doesn't have any known vices like excessive drinking or gambling. Here's what they don't tell you: whether he's kind, whether he laughs easily, whether he reads poetry or enjoys music, whether he'll care about your thoughts or your feelings, or your existence beyond your ability to produce sons. These questions, you're learning, are irrelevant to the transaction being negotiated in your father's council chamber. You meet him exactly once before the wedding, during a formal betrothal ceremony, where you're both surrounded by dozens of nobles, clergy, and officials. He takes your hand, speaks the required ceremonial words, and places a ring on your finger that's too large it spins around, the gemstone heavy on your small hand. You try to read something in his face, some hint of who he is beneath the crown and the formal composure, but his expression is as carefully neutral as yours. Two strangers performing a ritual that will bind you together for life. The wedding happens 3 months later, in the greatest cathedral in the kingdom, with more guests than you can count and celebrations that last for days. You're dressed in cloth of gold, so heavy you can barely walk, and crowned as queen before you've even shared a private conversation with your new husband. During the ceremony, You repeat vows in Latin that you've memorized phonetically, promising obedience and fidelity and devotion to a man whose voice you barely recognize. The wedding night is awkward and painful, and mercifully brief your mother prepared you somewhat, explaining the mechanics in clinical terms that made it sound like a medical procedure. Your husband is neither cruel nor gentle, he's efficient, performing his duty to consummate the marriage and hopefully begin producing heirs. And then begins your life as queen, which turns out to be far more boring and isolating than you'd imagined during those brief moments as a child when you fantasized about wearing a crown. Yes, you have beautiful clothes and jewels and servants attending your every need. Yes, you live in a magnificent castle with tapestries and gardens and luxuries your father's household could never afford. But you're also profoundly alone in ways that are hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. Your husband treats you politely, distantly, like a valuable possession he's satisfied with, but not particularly interested in. He visits your chambers perhaps once or twice a week, always at night, always for the same purpose, and leaves as soon as the act is complete. During the day, you might see him at meals or ceremonies, where he nods to you formally and occasionally asks if you're well. But you've never had what you'd call an actual conversation. He doesn't ask about your thoughts, your interests, your feelings. Why would he? You're performing your role adequately managing the household, appearing at his side during official functions, and hopefully, eventually, becoming pregnant. Do you remember how you thought marriage might mean companionship? How you imagined maybe growing to love your husband over time? The way your mother claimed to love your father, that hope dies slowly over your first year as queen, withering like flowers nobody remembers to water. The other women in the castle aren't exactly friends either. The noble ladies are either older women who find you hopelessly young and naive, or younger women who resent your position and compete viciously for proximity to power. Your ladies-in-waiting serve you dutifully, but most despise for their own families. Reporting back everything you say and do, you learn quickly to trust no one, to keep your real thoughts hidden, to perform cheerfulness and piety and contentment even when you're screaming inside. Historians still argue whether medieval political marriages were genuinely loveless, or whether couples sometimes developed real affection over time. The evidence is mixed. Some royal correspondence suggests genuine partnerships. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II apparently had passionate arguments, which at least indicates they cared enough to fight. Other sources paint grimmer pictures of wives essentially imprisoned in lonely castles while their husbands waged war and bedded mistresses. The truth probably varied wildly depending on the individuals involved. But here's an uncomfortable fact in your era. Nobody particularly cared whether queens were happy. Your job was to be useful, not fulfilled. You try to find meaning in your duties. You become involved in charitable works, visiting the sick in the castle town, distributing food to the poor during feast days. You embroider altar cloths for the chapel and endow a small convent in your mother's name. You learn to play the politics of the court, mediating disputes among nobles' wives, carefully balancing factions so no single family gains too much influence. You become, by most objective measures, a good queen, competent, pious, diplomatic. But here's a quirky detail that might amuse you. Medieval queens actually wielded significant economic power that's often overlooked. You control your own household budget, which in a major kingdom could be enormous equivalent to millions in modern currency. You have your own estates granted as part of your marriage settlement, generating income that's yours to spend. You can grant positions in your household to whomever you choose, creating a network of people who owe their livelihoods to you. In some ways, you're running a substantial business enterprise disguised as a domestic sphere. If you weren't so lonely, You might actually find the work interesting. 2 years pass, then 3. You don't get pregnant, which becomes increasingly awkward as nobles begin whispering about your fertility. Your husband's physicians examine you, asking invasive questions and prescribing disgusting herbal remedies. Nobody considers that perhaps the problem isn't you medieval medical understanding blamed women for conception failures roughly 99% of the time. The pressure builds with each month that you bleed, each cycle that passes without the longed-for announcement of a royal heir. Your husband grows colder, not overtly hostile, just more distant, as though you were a failed investment he's trying to decide whether to write off. He spends more time away from the castle, hunting or visiting his estates or conducting military campaigns along the borders. When he is home, you notice him paying increasing attention to the younger ladies at court. The affair with the Burgundian girl begins in your 3rd year of marriage. Everyone knows about it, except officially nobody knows about it. If that makes sense. Court protocol requires everyone to pretend they don't notice when your husband disappears with her after banquets, when she receives expensive gifts, when she starts wearing French silk that she couldn't possibly afford on her family's income. You're supposed to ignore this. Royal wives have endured their husbands' infidelities since time immemorial. Getting upset about it would be unseemly, possessive, distinctly unqueenly. You're supposed to maintain your dignity, focus on your own duties, and certainly never suggest that you might desire the same freedom your husband takes for granted. But something in you begins to shift during that 3rd year. Maybe it's watching your husband lavish attention on his mistress while barely speaking to you. Maybe it's the grinding loneliness of being surrounded by hundreds of people but genuinely known by none. Maybe it's the slow realization that this is your life forever, decades stretching ahead of performing this role. Fulfilling these duties, smiling this empty smile until you die and some chronicler writes a single paragraph about you that mentions only your father's name and whether you produced sons. The night you receive his first letter, you've just returned from another humiliating dinner where your husband spent the entire meal laughing with his mistress while you sat at the high table making polite conversation with a visiting bishop. You're 37. No. Wait, you're 17 now. 3 years married, and you feel simultaneously ancient and like your life hasn't started yet. You open your prayer book in the chapel, seeking whatever comfort religion might offer, and a folded piece of parchment falls out. His words are simple, observational, nothing overtly improper that could get either of you in trouble if discovered. But underneath the innocent content, you sense something else, someone seeing you, really seeing you, noticing details about you beyond your title and your function. He's noticed that you prefer the chapel in the late afternoon, when the light comes through the western windows at a certain angle. He's noticed that you smile differently when you're genuinely amused versus when you're performing courtly politeness. He's noticed you, and God help you. But that attention feels like water in a desert, like air after drowning, like waking up after 3 years of sleepwalking through someone else's life. You shouldn't respond. You know you shouldn't respond. But you do just a few carefully neutral lines left in the same prayer book the next day, acknowledging his observation about the starlings, adding your own comment about how they seem to dance in the air before settling on the tower stones. That's how it starts. Not with grand passion or reckless abandon, but with simple human connection, two people seeing each other across the vast loneliness of court life and daring to say, "You're not invisible to me. Your political marriage has given you everything except the one thing you're beginning to realize: you desperately need someone who cares whether you exist beyond the role you play. And that need, you're learning, can be more dangerous than any sword. You need to understand who he is, not the fantasy you've constructed in your lonely chambers, but the actual man who's about to complicate your life in ways that might end with both of you dead. His name is Roland, though in some versions of stories like yours, chroniclers change names to protect the guilty or perhaps to universalize the scandal. He's a minor nobleman, third son of a family with respectable bloodlines, but limited land holdings. Third sons in medieval nobility occupy this strange position, too well born to become merchants or craftsmen, but without the inheritance or prospects of their elder brothers. They typically have three options: the church, military service, or attaching themselves to a powerful household, hoping to earn lands through loyal service. Roland chose the third path, entering your husband's court 5 years ago as a knight in the royal guard. Here's what makes him dangerous to your carefully constructed composure: he's educated. Not just trained in swordplay and horsemanship like most knights, but actually literate, well-read, versed in poetry and philosophy. His mother, you'll later learn, was unusually learned for a noblewoman and insisted all her sons receive classical education alongside their martial training. Roland can quote Ovid and debate theological fine points, and write in both Latin and the vernacular with equal elegance. In a court full of competent warriors and cunning politicians, he's that rare thing, someone who thinks about ideas, who questions assumptions, who sees the world as more complex than simple hierarchies of power. He's also beautiful, though that word feels inadequate. 26 years old, tall and lean from constant training, with dark hair that never quite stays properly controlled and eyes that shift between grey and blue depending on the light. But it's not really his physical appearance that catches you. Plenty of handsome men populate your husband's court. It's the way he moves through the world with this quiet confidence, this sense that he knows exactly who he is and feels no need to prove it to anyone. While other young nobles jostle for attention and advancement, Roland seems content to excel at his duties, read in the castle library, and observe court life with what you've come to recognize as bemused detachment. You first truly noticed him beyond just another night in the Great Hall during a court entertainment 6 months ago. A travelling troupe performed a romantic tale about Tristan and Isolde, that famous story of forbidden love between a knight and his lord's wife. Most of the court laughed at the dramatic moments or whispered through this performance. But you caught Roland watching with complete absorption, his expression suggesting he understood the tragedy wasn't just about desire, but about the impossible position of people trapped between loyalty and love. When the performance ended and everyone applauded politely before returning to their wine and gossip, you saw him sit quietly for a long moment, still lost in the story's melancholy beauty. That's when something shifted in your perception. Here was someone who felt things deeply, who understood that life contained more than power struggles and property disputes. Do you remember the exact moment you fell? It was 3 weeks after the performance. During a garden party your husband hosted for visiting dignitaries. You'd been performing your queenly duties, making gracious conversation, complimenting the ambassador's wife on her gown, pretending interest in a merchant's description of new silk routes from the east. You excused yourself to walk among the roses, needing just 5 minutes away from the performance, and found Roland standing alone near the fountain, reading a small book he'd apparently brought with him. "My lady," he said, startled, immediately bowing and moving to leave. "Please, don't go." You said, surprising yourself, "What are you reading that's more interesting than diplomatic small talk?" He smiled. They're not the calculated court smile everyone uses, but something genuine and slightly self-deprecating. Boethius? Actually, the consolation of philosophy? Probably pretentious to bring to a garden party. Or honest? you replied. Most people here are pretending to enjoy themselves. At least you brought your own entertainment. That was your first real conversation. 15 minutes talking about philosophy, about whether happiness comes from external circumstances or internal disposition, about how Boethius wrote his greatest work while imprisoned and awaiting execution. Neither of you said anything improper. Any observer would have seen only a queen making polite conversation with one of her husband's knights. But underneath the philosophical discussion, something else was happening, a recognition, an understanding, a sense that you'd both been waiting for someone to talk to about real things instead of the endless surface-level exchanges that fill court life. He's been careful since then, not avoiding you, which would be suspicious, but not seeking you out either. You see him during ceremonies, at banquets, in the courtyard during training exercises. Sometimes your eyes meet across crowded rooms and something passes between you, not even a full smile. Just acknowledgement. I see you. I know you're there. You exist to me as more than decoration. Historians still argue whether medieval courtly love, that idealized, often unconsummated passion between knights and noble ladies, was real or purely literary convention. Some scholars insist it was just poetry, fantasy, elaborate game playing that everyone understood wasn't meant to translate to actual affairs. Others point to evidence of genuine relationships, letters that suggest real emotional and physical connections. The truth probably varied. Some courtly love stayed safely in the realm of flirtation and verse. Other times, people who started by exchanging poetry ended up risking everything for each other. Here's a quirky historical detail. Medieval courts actually had elaborate social codes for this exact situation. The rules of courtly love, popularised by Eleanor of Aquitaine's court and spread through troubadour songs, provided a framework for knights to idealise and serve noble ladies without theoretically crossing into actual adultery. A knight could dedicate himself to a lady, write poetry for her, wear her favour in tournaments, all while maintaining plausible deniability about physical involvement. It was simultaneously a safety valve for sexual tension and a game of chicken with disaster. The moment admiration became actual affair. You crossed from fashionable courtly love into prosecutable adultery. Roland understands this better than you do. You'll realise later. He's been navigating court life longer, knows exactly how dangerous this attraction is becoming. His first letter, the one about starlings, was carefully calibrated, poetic enough to signal interest, vague enough to deny romantic intent if discovered. The second letter pushed slightly further, commenting on your laugh, but still maintained the tone of courtly admiration rather than improper proposal. This third letter, the one you're holding now, the one suggesting an actual meeting, this is him deciding, choosing, saying I know the risks, and I think you're worth them. What you don't know yet, what you won't learn until later, is that Roland has been fighting this attraction for months. He's not some careless seducer looking for conquest or advancement. In fact, approaching the Queen is possibly the stupidest career move he could make. If your husband discovers this, Roland doesn't just lose his position, he loses his life. Probably after torture designed to extract the names of anyone who helped facilitate the affair. There's no upside for him politically. No lands to gain, no titles to earn, no family advantage to secure. Which means, and this is either the most romantic or most terrifying thing about your situation, he's pursuing you simply because he can't help himself. Because something about you has gotten under his skin in a way that makes caution seem less important than the chance to know you better. He wrote you later, in letters you'll receive over the coming weeks, about when he knew he was in trouble. It was during a winter feast when you laughed at something he couldn't even remember what, and your whole face transformed from queenly composure to genuine joy for just a moment. "I realised," he wrote, "that I wanted to spend my life finding ways to make you laugh like that, and I knew that wanting anything about your life was the beginning of disaster for both of us. But knowing something is disaster doesn't always stop you from walking toward it. Sometimes it just means you go with your eyes open. You'll meet him tomorrow in the herb garden. You've decided. Your hands still shake when you think about it. But underneath the fear is something else: anticipation, excitement, the feeling of being alive in a way you haven't felt since before your wedding day. You're not naive enough to think this is safe or smart or anything other than potentially catastrophic. But you're also done being the perfect, lonely, ignored queen who does everything right and gets nothing but emptiness in return. Roland is offering you something your husband never has genuine interest in: who you are beneath the crown. The question isn't whether it's dangerous. Of course it's dangerous. The question is whether a life without risk, connection, or authentic feeling is really life at all, or just elaborate sleepwalking until you die. Medieval women, especially queens, were expected to sacrifice everything: autonomy, desire, selfhood for duty, family, political stability, and most did. History is full of forgotten queens who lived their entire lives in service to everyone except themselves. But history also remembers the ones who said no. I want something for myself, even if it destroys me. You're about to become the second kind of queen. Tomorrow afternoon, in a garden that smells of lavender and rosemary, you'll meet a man who sees you as a woman rather than a function. And whether that meeting leads to love or disaster or both, well, that's the story we're here to explore together, as you drift towards sleep with the weight of a decision already made, even if you haven't quite admitted it to yourself yet. Tomorrow everything begins. The afternoon arrives like a held breath finally released. You've been awake since before dawn, stomach twisted with nerves and anticipation, and something that might be terror, or might be exhilaration, honestly. At this point they feel identical. Your husband left for the royal forest at first light with a hunting party of 20 men, planning to be gone until nightfall. He didn't tell you goodbye, just nodded vaguely in your direction during breakfast before striding out with his dogs and his falcons and his favourite nobles. The Burgundian girl watched from a window, looking disappointed she wasn't invited, which almost made you laugh. Even mistresses have limited access to the king's time. You spend the morning performing your usual duties with unusual distraction. You review household accounts with your steward, approving expenditures for candles and wine and wheat, but you have to ask him to repeat the grain storage numbers 3 times. You receive a merchant's wife seeking patronage for her husband's textile business, nodding through her pitch while your mind calculates what time you can reasonably leave for the garden without seeming suspicious. You attend midday prayers in the chapel, kneeling on cold stone while the priest drones through Latin liturgy, and realise you haven't absorbed a single word because you're rehearsing what you might say when you see Roland, how you'll explain yourself, whether you'll have the courage to meet his eyes. Finally, mercifully, the afternoon bells ring. You tell your closest lady-in-waiting, a girl named Marguerite, who's less observant than most, that you're going to walk in the herb garden, that you have a headache and the fresh air might help, that you wish to be alone for prayer and contemplation. She accepts this easily. You've established a pattern of solitary garden walks over the past 3 years, seeking escape from the claustrophobic castle atmosphere. It's one of the few freedoms queens are permitted: time alone with God, and plants is considered appropriately pious and feminine. The herb garden occupies a walled section of the castle grounds, originally designed to supply the kitchens and infirmary with medicinal plants. It's beautiful in a practical sort of way: rows of lavender and rosemary, beds of mint and sage, climbing roses on the stone walls, A small fountain in the centre where water trickles from a carved lion's mouth. Crucially, it's relatively private, visible from only a few castle windows, most of which belong to storage rooms that are rarely occupied, not perfectly secret, but as close as you can get in a castle full of watchful eyes. You arrive first, which gives you approximately 90 seconds to question every decision that's led to this moment. What are you doing? You're a queen. You're married before God and witnesses. You're risking everything, your position, your safety, possibly your life for what? A conversation with a man you barely know. The chance to feel something other than numbness. Yes? Apparently, yes. That's exactly what you're doing. Then he's there, emerging from the shadow of the garden gate, and your internal argument evaporates like morning mist. He's not wearing armour or formal court dress, just a simple tunic and hose. His sword belt left behind somewhere coming armed to a secret meeting with the Queen would be presumptuous, threatening. He looks nervous too, you realise, which somehow makes this easier. You're both terrified. You're both his anyway. My lady, he says, bowing formally, and you almost laugh at the absurdity of protocol in this decidedly improper situation. Roland, you reply, and just saying his name aloud feels transgressive. Intimate. Queens don't typically address knights by their Christian names. For a moment you just look at each other, the fountain gurgling behind you, a bee investigating the lavender nearby. The afternoon sun is warm but not uncomfortable, and somewhere distant you hear kitchen servants singing while they work. The world continues normally while you stand at the edge of something that could shatter your entire existence. I wasn't sure you'd come, he says finally. I wasn't sure either. Until I was walking here. You gesture vaguely at the garden. We should probably discuss how monumentally stupid this is. He laughs, surprised and genuine. I've thought of little else for weeks. I've composed and discarded approximately 50 speeches about why we should both turn around and pretend this never happened. And yet, here you are. Here I am. His expression softens, grows serious. I needed to know if I'd imagined it. This connection. If I was simply projecting loneliness onto a queen who has just been polite to one of her husband's knights. You should probably maintain some pretense of propriety here, some queenly distance. Instead, you find yourself being honest in a way you haven't been with anyone in years. You didn't imagine it. I've been trying to convince myself you did, that I've invented this entire thing because I'm miserable and isolated and desperate for human connection. But no, it's real, whatever it is. Do you understand how radical this admission is? Queens don't confess misery. Queens don't admit desperation. You're supposed to be above such human weakness, performing contentment regardless of reality. But something about Roland makes pretense feel more exhausting than honesty. He steps closer, not inappropriately close. You could still claim proper distance if someone stumbled upon you, but close enough that you can see the exact shade of his eyes. Close enough that you're intensely aware of his presence as something physical, magnetic. Tell me about yourself, he says. Not the queen, you, the person behind all that performance. And so you do. You talk for an hour, maybe more, sitting on the stone bench near the fountain while afternoon sun slants through the garden and turns everything golden. You tell him about your childhood in your father's castle, how you loved reading but your mother discouraged it as unfeminine. You describe your wedding day, the terror and strangeness of becoming queen at 14. You admit how lonely you've been, how isolated, how you've become skilled at performing a role while feeling like your actual self is shrinking smaller and smaller inside the queen costume. He listens, truly listens, not just waiting for his turn to talk, but actually absorbing what you're saying, asking questions that suggest he's thinking about your words. And then he shares too. He tells you about being a third son, always expendable, watching his brothers inherit while he scrambled for position. He describes his mother's death when he was 16, how she made him promise to keep reading, to stay curious, to never let military service turn him into the kind of man who thinks only of violence and status. He admits he often feels like an imposter at court, playing at being a proper knight while secretly thinking half the nobility are pompous fools and the whole system of hereditary power is fundamentally absurd. That's practically heresy, you say, delighted. Only if you report me to your husband. He grins. Will you? I'm sitting in a garden having an inappropriate conversation with you. I think we're past the point where I'm likely to report anyone for anything. Here's what's happening beneath the conversation you're falling. Not the sudden, dramatic plunge of romantic ballads, but the gradual, terrifying slip of realizing someone understands you in ways you'd stopped hoping anyone would. Every time he responds to something you've said with insight rather than platitude. Every time he makes you laugh at the absurdities you've been taking so seriously. Every time he looks at you like you're fascinating rather than ornamental, you slide a little further toward disaster. Historians still argue whether love is universal across cultures and time periods, or whether each era creates its own version shaped by social expectations. Medieval love, especially noble love, certainly looked different from modern romance. It was more formal, more ritualized, more embedded in concepts of honour and service. But the underlying experience meeting someone who makes you feel seen, understood, alive, that seems pretty consistent across centuries. The language changes, the circumstances change, the basic human experience of connection that stays recognisable. Here's a quirky detail about medieval gardens that's relevant to your situation. Herb gardens were often associated with women's magic and knowledge. Spaces where ladies cultivated plants for healing, cooking, and sometimes subtle poisoning. They occupied this liminal zone between domestic duty and mysterious feminine power. Meeting in the herb garden carries symbolic weight. You're in a space that's traditionally female-controlled. Where women held knowledge and authority, men often didn't fully understand. It's not quite as transgressive as sneaking into his chambers, but it's also not as public as the Great Hall. The garden exists in the in-between, much like this developing relationship that's not quite innocent, but not yet explicitly an affair. The conversation eventually turns to books, and you discover you've both read The Romance of the Rose, that famous medieval poem about love and desire disguised as allegory. He admits he found parts of it frustratingly misogynistic, the sections where women are portrayed as fundamentally deceptive, and you nearly kiss him right there just for having that opinion. Men who actually think about women as complex human beings rather than simplified stereotypes are distressingly rare in your experience. What do you want? He asks suddenly. Not what you're supposed to want as queen, but actually. The question catches you off guard. Nobody asks queens what they want. I want to matter, you hear yourself say. Not as a womb or a diplomatic tool, but as a person. I want conversations that aren't performance. I want to feel something other than dutiful and empty. I want... You trail off, unable to quite articulate the longing that's been building for 3 years. To be seen, he finishes softly. To exist as yourself, not just as a function. Yes, exactly yes. He reaches out carefully, giving you time to pull away, and takes your hand. Just holds it, his thumb brushing across your knuckles. The touch is innocent by most standards. You're not embracing or kissing, but it's also the most intimate physical contact you've had with anyone since your wedding night. Your husband touches you sexually, but not affectionately. This is the opposite, and somehow more powerful for it. I see you, Roland says, his voice low and intense. I've seen you since that garden party when you talked about Boethius like you actually cared about ideas instead of just pretending for politeness. I see how lonely you are, how hard you work to be good at this impossible role, how much courage it takes to smile through all the ways your husband fails to value you. I see you, and you're extraordinary. You're crying now, not dramatic sobs, but quiet tears sliding down your face because nobody has said anything like this to you in so long you'd forgotten what it felt like to be recognised as human. This is the moment, right here, with his hand holding yours and his eyes meeting yours with absolute honesty. This is where you could still turn back, could thank him for the conversation, could return to being the perfect, lonely queen who does everything right and wants nothing for herself. Instead, you lean forward and kiss him. It's brief, just a few seconds before you both pull back, shocked by your own boldness. But it's enough. Enough to cross the line from emotional intimacy into physical betrayal. Enough to make this unambiguously an affair rather than just a charged friendship. Enough to begin the chain of events that might destroy you both. We can't, he whispers. But he hasn't let go of your hand. I know. Your husband would have me killed. I know. This is impossible. I know. You smile despite the tears. When can I see you again? And there it is. You've decided, chosen, committed yourself to this dangerous, reckless, beautiful thing that makes you feel more alive than you have in years. You make a plan vague, inadequate, but better than nothing. You'll continue exchanging letters, hiding them in the prayer book you keep in the chapel. You'll find moments at court events to exchange words that look innocent but carry deeper meaning. You'll steal these rare meetings in the garden when circumstances allow. When your husband is away and the castle rhythms create brief pockets of privacy. It's not enough. It's nowhere near enough. But it's something. And something feels like oxygen after 3 years of suffocation. When you finally leave the garden, separately, carefully, you're transformed. Still the queen on the outside, still performing your role. But inside, you're someone different now. Someone with a secret. Someone taking what she wants instead of just accepting what she's given. Someone alive and terrified and exhilarated all at once. That night, alone in your chambers, you replay every moment. His words, his touch, that kiss. And you know, with absolute certainty, that you've just made either the best or worst decision of your life. Probably both. You become an expert in invisible things, stolen glances that last half a heartbeat, letters written in careful code, conversations that sound innocent but pulse with hidden meaning. The affair, if you can even call it that yet, exists mostly in fragments and anticipation. A brush of hands when he helps you mount your horse for a procession. 3 sentences exchanged in a corridor when no one else is close enough to hear. Letters tucked into your prayer book that you read so many times the parchment grows soft from handling. It's been 2 months since that first kiss in the herb garden, and you've managed exactly 4 more meetings, each one brief and anxious and never quite enough. The scarcity makes everything more intense. You're rationing connection the way a starving person rations bread, making each moment stretch as far as possible. You've become hyper-aware of Roland's presence anywhere in the castle. You can feel when he enters a room even when your back is turned. Some 6th sense attuned to his existence in a way that would be embarrassing if it weren't so all-consuming. The court, mercifully, seems oblivious. Or perhaps not entirely oblivious. There's always gossip in royal households. Rumours floating like dust in sunlight, but nothing's coalesced into actual accusation yet. You're both so careful, so restrained. You never seek him out publicly, never show favouritism. never give anyone concrete evidence of impropriety. When he participates in tournaments, you cheer for all the knights equally, even though your heart nearly stops every time he takes a hit. When you distribute favours or gifts to your household, he receives nothing special, nothing that would mark him as different from any other knight in your husband's service. But people are starting to notice things. You can feel it in the way certain ladies in waiting watch you more closely, in the speculative looks exchanged between nobles when Roland happens to be in your vicinity. Nothing overt, nothing you could point to as definite suspicion, but that subtle shift in atmosphere when a secret is trying to surface but hasn't quite broken through yet. Your closest call happens during a feast celebrating your husband's birthday. You're seated at the high table, performing your role perfectly smiling, raising your goblet in toasts, making appropriate conversation with the visiting duke on your left. Roland is far across the hall with the other knights, drinking and laughing at some joke you can't hear. You're not even looking at him, carefully keeping your gaze away from his section of the room. Then someone mentions Tristan and Isolde, that same doomed romance you watched performed months ago. A visiting poet offers to recite a section, and everyone settles in with more wine while he launches into the famous scene where Isolde realizes she's fallen in love with her husband's most trusted knight. The terrible moment of recognition that her heart has betrayed her duty. You feel your face flush hot. You're intensely aware that you're living this story, that everyone in this room is listening to a poetic version of exactly what you're doing. You force yourself to stay composed, to react with polite interest like everyone else. But your hands are shaking slightly as you lift your wine cup. Do not look at Roland. Do not look at Roland. Whatever you do, do not. Your eyes meet his across the crowded hall. Just for a second. Just long enough to see that he's thinking exactly what you're thinking. That this poem is hitting far too close to home. Then you both look away. But it's too late. You caught it. And worse. You're fairly certain that Lady Agnes, your most observant and least trustworthy lady in waiting, caught it too. She's watching you with this considering expression, her sharp little mind clearly working through possibilities. You spend the rest of the feast in silent panic, smiling and nodding while internally screaming. After it finally ends and you can escape to your chambers, you find a note tucked into your sleeve. He must have slipped it there somehow, during the crowd's movement. "Too dangerous," it reads. "We need to stop." He's right, of course. You know he's right. The sensible thing, the safe thing, would be to end this now before it develops into something that can't be denied or explained away. You're still technically on the edge of plausible deniability, a few private conversations, a kiss or two. Nothing that's gone beyond what you could theoretically frame as temptation resisted rather than adultery committed. You write back, "I know, tomorrow in the garden," because apparently you're incapable of making good decisions anymore. Because the thought of stopping, of returning to that empty existence where nobody sees you and nothing matters, feels worse than any risk. Historians still argue about the nature of medieval adultery laws and how consistently they were enforced. The legal code was clear, and brutal queens who committed adultery faced potential execution. Their lovers definitely faced execution, usually preceded by torture. But actual enforcement varied wildly depending on politics, evidence, and whether the king wanted to be rid of his wife anyway. Some queens were executed for adultery that was probably fabricated Anne Boleyn. Though that's in your future, others conducted relatively open affairs for years without consequences, because their husbands either didn't care or found divorce politically inconvenient. The law said one thing, reality was more complicated, shaped by power dynamics and political calculations. But here's the terrifying part: even if your husband never finds out, even if you're never formally accused, the suspicion alone can destroy you. Queens needed to be beyond reproach, their reputation spotless, because their children's legitimacy depended on unquestionable virtue. Once serious rumours started circulating about a queen's fidelity, her political value plummeted. Courtiers who'd been allies would distance themselves. Any children she bore would face whispered doubts about paternity. The crown she wore would feel increasingly unstable on her head. You meet Roland in the garden the next day, and this time neither of you pretends you're going to end things. Instead, you find a new routine, a pattern that will sustain you through the next several months. Brief meetings every week or two when circumstances allow, letters hidden in increasingly creative locations tucked into library books you both read, left in the chapel behind a loose stone, once folded impossibly small and pressed into the binding of your embroidery basket. A coded language develops between you when he wears blue at tournaments. It means he's left you a letter. When you arrange white roses in your chambers rather than red, it means the next garden meeting is safe. The physical aspect of your relationship develops slowly, carefully. You're both terrified of pregnancy, which would be undeniable proof of adultery. Medieval contraception is unreliable at best. There are herbal remedies and timing methods, but nothing foolproof. So you explore intimacy in other ways, hours of conversation, kisses that grow longer and deeper, touches that stay carefully short of the act that could create a child. It's simultaneously frustrating and intensely erotic, this enforced restraint that makes every touch feel weighted with significance. Here's a quirky detail about medieval intimacy. People of your era actually had more sophisticated understanding of female pleasure than many later historical periods. Medical texts acknowledge that women experience sexual desire and pleasure, sometimes even suggesting that female satisfaction was important for conception. They were wrong about the conception part. But at least they acknowledged women had desires. The Victorian idea that respectable women didn't enjoy sex wouldn't emerge for centuries. So when Roland focuses on your pleasure rather than just his own, when he asks what you like, when he treats your desire as worthy of attention, he's actually operating within a medieval framework that recognized women as sexual beings, not just passive vessels. 3 months into the affair, you have your first serious fight. It starts because you mention, casually, that your husband has resumed visiting your chambers at night with renewed frequency. He's apparently decided to make another serious attempt at producing an heir, which means regular conjugal visits whether you want them or not. Roland's reaction is visceral and immediate. "I can't," he breaks off, his hands clenched into fists. "The thought of him touching you makes me want to commit treason. He's my husband," you say quietly. "I don't have the option to refuse him. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. It doesn't make it easier. Do you think it's easier for me?" Your voice rises despite your intention to stay calm. "Do you think I enjoy performing wifely duties with a man who treats me like breeding stock while my heart belongs to someone else?" It's the first time either of you has said anything like that. My heart belongs to you, and the words hang in the air between you, huge and terrifying and true. "This is impossible," Roland says. "Not for the first time. You're married. You're the queen. There's no future here. No version of this story ends well." "I know. Then why are we doing this?" You consider the question seriously, because he deserves honesty. "Because 6 months ago I wanted to die. Not dramatically, not suicidally exactly, just I wanted to stop existing because existence felt like nothing but performance and emptiness. And then you saw me. Really saw me. And I started wanting to live again. Even if this is doomed, even if we're heading toward disaster, at least I feel alive while we're doing it." He pulls you close then, holding you so tightly you can feel his heartbeat against your cheek. "If they discover us," he whispers into your hair, "they'll kill me in ways designed to maximize suffering. They'll parade you through the streets, strip you of your title, possibly execute you too, depending on your husband's political calculations. We're risking everything. I know. And you think it's worth it. You pull back enough to look at his face, memorizing the exact shape of his jaw, the grey-blue of his eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow from some childhood accident. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like myself. So yes, however this ends, yes. Do you remember learning to swim as a child, that moment when you first let go of the riverbank and trusted the water to hold you? This feels similar, terrifying and exhilarating. The conscious choice to stop clinging to safety and instead surrender to something that might carry you or might drown you. But at least you'll have tried. The whispers are growing louder now. You can feel them. Lady Agnes watches you with barely concealed speculation. One of your husband's advisors mentioned, seemingly casually, that perhaps you should spend less time in solitary prayer and more time visible at court, events a subtle suggestion that your absences are being noted and discussed. Your husband himself has said nothing directly, but sometimes you catch him looking at you with this calculating expression, like he's trying to solve a puzzle he's just noticed exists. You're running out of time. You can feel it the way animals supposedly sense earthquakes before they hit some instinctive knowledge that the ground is about to shift beneath your feet. But you can't stop. The affair has its own momentum now, its own gravity. You and Roland are caught in it like leaves in a river current, swept along toward whatever waterfall or calm harbour awaits. Stopping feels impossible, even though continuing is madness. So you continue, stealing moments, writing letters, living 2 lives simultaneously, the public queen and the private woman who loves a man she cannot have. Walking the knife's edge between secret joy and potential catastrophe. And waiting. Always waiting. For the moment when someone finally sees what they've been almost seeing for months. When suspicion crystallizes into certainty. When your carefully constructed secret finally, inevitably, falls apart. Your husband knows something. You're not sure what exactly. Not sure how much. But the atmosphere is shifted like air pressure before a storm. He's watching you now, not constantly, not obviously, but with this new attentiveness that makes your skin crawl. Where he used to barely acknowledge your existence beyond formal occasions and conjugal visits. He's suddenly interested in your daily routines, your activities, your whereabouts. It starts small. One morning at breakfast, he asks where you walked yesterday afternoon. Just casual conversation. The kind of question a husband might reasonably ask his wife. You answer truthfully the herb garden, as usual, and he nods, sips his wine, says nothing more. But you felt the question's weight, the way it wasn't really about gardens at all. Then he suggests you might enjoy attending the afternoon training sessions, where his knights practice swordplay and horsemanship. You spend so much time alone, he says, his tone pleasant but somehow pointed. Perhaps you'd find it entertaining to watch the men train. Many noble ladies enjoy it. What he means, you understand immediately, is that he wants you visible, supervised, surrounded by witnesses rather than wandering off to private gardens where anyone could join you. You agree with appropriate wifely gratitude, and spend the next week watching sweaty men hit each other with practice swords while your husband sits beside you, occasionally commenting on technique, never quite looking at you directly, but always aware of your presence. Roland is among the training knights, of course, and you have to watch him without watching him. Have to keep your face carefully neutral when he takes a hard hit. Have to show no more interest in his performance than in any other knight's. It's exhausting, this constant performance of indifference toward the person who's become the centre of your emotional world. Lady Agnes is watching too, her sharp eyes moving between you and Roland like she's trying to solve a puzzle. She's always been ambitious, angling for influence and position, and she's clearly decided that information about the Queen's potential indiscretions might be valuable currency. You catch her whispering with other ladies in waiting, See them glance in your direction with barely suppressed excitement. Court gossip is its own form of entertainment, and rumours about the Queen's virtue are premium content. The letters have to stop. You and Roland agree on this after a particularly close call, when Marguerite almost discovered the note hidden in your prayer book. She was reaching for it to move it aside while cleaning, and you had to practically leap across the room to grab it first. Making some awkward excuse about wanting to pray immediately, Marguerite accepted your explanation with her usual oblivious sweetness. But the incident terrified you both. No more letters. Too risky. Which means no communication except stolen moments at public events. Brief exchanges that have to look entirely innocent because you're constantly being observed now. It's like being slowly suffocated. This isolation after months of connection. Your husband spies because of course he has spies. All kings do are everywhere suddenly. Or maybe they always were and you just notice them now. Servants who seem to be in whatever room you enter, lingering just a bit too long. Guards posted at garden entrances who note your comings and goings. Your husband's chamberlain asking innocent-seeming questions about your household routines, your friendships with various ladies, whether any of the knights have been particularly attentive to you. You're careful. So careful. You and Roland haven't been alone together in 3 weeks. You barely even look at each other during public events. You're doing everything right, maintaining perfect propriety, giving no one any concrete evidence of wrongdoing. But here's what you're learning about suspicion. It doesn't need proof. Suspicion feeds on absence of evidence as easily as presence of it. The more carefully you avoid Roland, the more the whispers suggest there must be something to avoid. The more properly you behave, the more people read performance into your propriety. You cannot win this game. The rules are designed to ensure that once suspicion attaches to a queen, innocence becomes nearly impossible to prove. Historians still argue about how much actual power medieval queens held versus how much they were simply figureheads. The answer varies tremendously by kingdom, time period, and individual circumstances. Some queens were genuine political players. Eleanor of Aquitaine effectively ruled England while her sons were away on crusade. Others were completely sidelined, powerless decorations in their husbands' courts. But here's what's consistent: queens were always vulnerable to sexual scandal in ways kings never were. A king could have a dozen mistresses and father illegitimate children across the kingdom without seriously threatening his authority. A queen accused of adultery even falsely faced potential execution, because her sexual conduct directly implicated legitimate succession and royal authority. The double standard is breathtaking in its cruelty. Your husband currently has 2 known mistresses, the Burgundian girl and, more recently, a young widow from a minor noble family. Everyone knows, no one cares. It's just expected that kings will have extramarital affairs. Meanwhile, you've kissed another man a handful of times, and it might literally cost you your head. 4 weeks after your husband's new surveillance begins, he summons you to his private chambers, not your shared bedroom for conjugal visits, but his actual personal rooms, where he conducts business and meets with advisors. This is unusual. Unsettling. Queens don't typically get called to the king's private chambers like errant servants. You go, of course. You don't have the choice. He's alone when you arrive, which is somehow more frightening than if he'd had guards or advisors present. He's sitting in a carved wooden chair near the fireplace, a goblet of wine in his hand, watching you enter with that same calculating expression you've been seeing more frequently. "Sit," he says, gesturing to the chair opposite him. You sit, arranging your skirts carefully, keeping your hands folded in your lap, your face composed, every inch the perfect queen, calm, innocent, untouchable. "There are rumours," he begins without preamble, "about you and one of my knights. Your heart stops, literally stops for a full beat before slamming back into motion so hard you can feel it in your throat. But your face doesn't change. You've had 3 years of practice at keeping your face neutral regardless of internal chaos. Rumours, my lord. Don't play stupid. It doesn't suit you. He leans forward slightly. Roland of House Beaumont, 3rd son, minor nobility, educated above his station. Do you know who I mean? I know the name, my lord. He serves in your household guard. He does, and apparently he's been seen in your vicinity rather frequently. Private conversations, lingering glances, the kind of attentiveness that makes people speculate. You force yourself to breathe normally, to think. People at court speculate about everything. My lord, is their primary occupation when not actively engaged in politics or gossip. I cannot control what stories servants invent for entertainment. So there's nothing between you, his eyes are sharp, watching for any flicker of reaction. I am your wife and your queen. I take those roles seriously. Which is not, you notice, actually answering his question. It's deflecting, redirecting to your general virtue rather than specifically denying the affair. But hopefully he'll hear what he wants to hear, a wife proclaiming innocence. He studies you for a long moment. I want to believe you, he says finally. Dealing with accusations of adultery against the Queen would be politically complicated, messy. I prefer to avoid that mess. Notice what he's saying, not that he'd be hurt or betrayed if you were unfaithful, but that it would be politically inconvenient. Your marriage really is just a practical arrangement for him, even now when he's confronting possible infidelity. He doesn't care about your heart or your loyalty, except as it affects his governance and succession. However, he continues, I cannot ignore persistent rumours. It reflects badly on my authority if I appear unable to control my own household. He drains his wine goblet and sets it down with deliberate care. So here's what will happen. Roland of House Beaumont will be transferred to my northern garrison, effective immediately. He'll serve out his remaining night service there, far from court. This removes any appearance of impropriety and, incidentally, tests whether these rumours have any substance. If you're innocent, you'll be relieved to have the source of gossip removed. If you're not, he lets the sentence hang unfinished, the threat implicit. You want to scream, want to throw something, rage against the casual way he's ripping away the one source of joy in your life. But you can't. You have to sit here, composed and queenly, and accept your husband's decision as though it's reasonable rather than devastating. That seems wise, my lord, you force yourself to say. Removing the subject of speculation should quiet the rumours. Good. He stands, signalling the conversation is over. I'm glad we understand each other. You may go. You rise, curtsy perfectly, and walk out of his chambers with measured, dignified steps. You make it all the way back to your own rooms, close the door behind you, dismiss your ladies-in-waiting claiming a headache, and only then do you allow yourself to fall apart. He's sending Roland away, hundreds of miles away, to some garrison on the northern frontier where knights serve multi-year rotations protecting against border incursions. You won't see him, won't speak to him, won't even be able to exchange letters safely because correspondence from the northern garrison passes through military channels that could be monitored. Here's a quirky historical detail that's currently devastating you. Medieval garrison postings to frontier regions were often punishment assignments. The northern borders were cold, isolated, dangerous, and boring months of routine patrol broken up by occasional violent skirmishes with raiders. Knights assigned there spent years away from court life, from culture, from everything that made existence bearable. Your husband is essentially exiling Roland while maintaining plausible deniability about it being punishment. Just a routine reassignment. He can claim if anyone asks. But everyone will understand what it really means. You have 2 days before Roland leaves. 2 days to somehow say goodbye to the man you love without anyone noticing that you're saying goodbye to the man you love. That night, you do something reckless. You write him a letter brief, carefully worded to be ambiguous if discovered, but clear enough that he'll understand. You tell him that rumours have reached certain ears, that caution is more important than ever, that you wish him well in his new posting. And then, at the bottom, you write something that could condemn you both if found. My heart goes with you, wherever you're sent. You bribe a young servant girl daughter of one of the kitchen workers, too young to understand the stakes to deliver the letter to Roland's chambers. It's dangerous, stupid, exactly the kind of risk you've been avoiding. But you can't let him leave thinking you didn't care, that you accepted his exile without protest, that you could just move on as though these months meant nothing. The next day, you attend court functions with perfect composure. You smile, you converse, you perform queenly grace while internally you're screaming. Roland is there too, his face carefully neutral, but you see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw is clenched. He received your letter, he knows what's happening. Your eyes meet once, across the great hall during evening meal, just once, for just a heartbeat. Everything you can't say is in that look. I love you. I'm sorry, this is impossible. I would change it if I could. Remember me. Please, remember me. Then you both look away, back to your separate performances, and you know with absolute certainty that you're losing him, that your husband has won this round, that whatever future you'd been half hoping might somehow materialise has just been crushed under the weight of royal politics and medieval power structures. Tomorrow, Roland leaves for the northern garrison, and you'll remain here, the perfect queen, smiling through your own heartbreak, because that's what queens do. They survive. They endure. They sacrifice everything personal for duty and appearance, and maintaining the fragile fiction that monarchy is somehow divinely ordained, rather than just humans playing elaborate games with each other's lives. You're learning exactly what forbidden love costs in a world where queens are property and desire is treason. It costs everything. He's gone. Roland left 3 days ago with a contingent of knights heading north, and you stood on the castle ramparts watching the party disappear into the morning mist like you were watching your own heart ride away. You couldn't even say goodbye properly, just a formal audience where your husband presented the reassigned knights with their new orders, and you sat on your throne looking appropriately regal and completely disinterested. Roland bowed to you the same way he bowed to your husband, his face a mask. And then he walked out of the great hall and out of your life. You thought you understood loneliness before. You were wrong. The loneliness you felt during your first 3 years of marriage was numbness, absence of connection. This is different. This is actively missing someone. Phantom limb pain for a person, the constant awareness of empty space where he used to be. You can't walk through the herb garden without remembering conversations. You can't attend court entertainments without instinctively looking for his face in the crowd. You can't pray in the chapel without thinking about letters hidden in your prayer book. Your husband seems satisfied that the problem has been solved. The rumours have quieted, not disappeared. Rumours never fully disappear, but faded to background noise without the physical presence of Roland to feed speculation. Your husband has resumed treating you with his usual polite indifference, apparently convinced that whatever was or wasn't happening has been adequately addressed by geographic separation. Lady Agnes looks disappointed. She was clearly hoping for more dramatic scandal, perhaps even hoping to be the one who brought definitive evidence of adultery to the king. Instead, the whole thing fizzled into mere routine reassignment, robbing her of her moment of importance. She still watches you sometimes, but with less intensity, like a cat that's lost interest in a mouse that won't run. You throw yourself into queenly duties with renewed dedication, partly because you have nothing else, and partly because staying busy keeps you from dissolving into complete despair. You expand your charitable works, visiting the sick more frequently, endowing a new hospice for elderly servants. You take greater interest in the castle's domestic management, personally reviewing every household account, reorganizing the storage systems for linens and supplies. You spend hours in the chapel, praying with genuine fervour for the first time in years, though what you're praying for, you're not entirely sure. Forgiveness, strength. Some miracle that could reunite you with Roland without destroying you both. 6 weeks after Roland's departure, you discover you're pregnant. The timing is ambiguous enough to be either salvation or damnation. Your husband has been visiting your chambers regularly for months, ostensibly attempting to produce an heir. If you calculate carefully, and you do obsessively, counting days over and over, the child could plausibly be your husband's. The conception would have occurred during a window when your husband was exercising his conjugal rights with renewed enthusiasm. But it also could have occurred during your last desperate meeting with Roland. The afternoon before your husband confronted you about the rumours, you'd met in the garden one final time, and you'd been reckless in ways you'd carefully avoided for months. You were saying goodbye, even though neither of you admitted it aloud. You weren't as careful as you should have been. So whose child are you carrying? Your husband's? Making this pregnancy the fulfillment of your queenly duty and securing your position, or Roland's? Making this pregnancy potential treason that could lead to your execution if anyone suspects the truth you don't know. You literally cannot know with certainty, and that uncertainty is going to define every moment of the next 7 months. Here's what you do know. You have to act like this is unambiguously your husband's child. Any hesitation, any doubt, any suggestion that paternity might be questioned would be catastrophic. So you announce the pregnancy with appropriate joy and relief. Your husband is genuinely pleased finally, an heir. Finally proof that his wife is fertile and fulfilling a primary function. The court celebrates with feasts and thanksgiving masses. Nobles shower you with gifts. Your status, which had been subtly undermined by rumours and 3 years of barrenness, is suddenly restored and even elevated. You smile through all of it while internally screaming, because every congratulation feels like mockery. Every celebration of your husband's virility feels like erasure of the man you actually love. Every prayer for a healthy prince feels like a lie you're perpetrating on the entire kingdom. Historians still argue about how many royal children throughout history were actually fathered by men other than their official fathers. The numbers are impossible to know. Successful royal adultery, by definition, leaves no definitive evidence. And unsuccessful adultery often ended in execution that prevented any children from being born at all. But scholars estimate that anywhere from 5 to 15% of historical royal successions involved children whose biological fathers weren't who everyone believed them to be. Genetic testing of royal remains sometimes reveals surprising results, lineages that don't match official genealogies, suggesting that medieval queens were more successful at conducting discreet affairs than historical records indicate. The thing is, if the child resembles your husband, everyone will assume he's the father, regardless of biological reality. Medieval people understood that children could inherit traits from either parent, but they didn't have modern genetics or paternity testing. Physical resemblance and timing were the only evidence available, and both could be ambiguous or interpreted in convenient ways. If the child resembles Roland, well, that depends entirely on whether the resemblance is obvious enough for people to notice and question. Hair colour, eye colour, facial features, these things aren't perfectly predictable even with modern genetic understanding. A child could inherit Roland's colouring by chance, or could look entirely like you, or could somehow blend features in a way that suggests your husband. You won't know until the baby is born. 7 months of not knowing. 7 months of carrying a child who might be your salvation or your death sentence. 7 months of performing joyful, expectant motherhood while terrified of what you'll see when you finally look at your baby's face. You write to Roland carefully, through channels that can't be easily traced. You send letters with travelling merchants heading north, paying them well for discretion. You don't mention the pregnancy explicitly. That would be too dangerous if a letter were intercepted. But you write in the coded language you developed during your affair. The garden has proven fertile this season. You write, "A harvest is expected before winter." He'll understand. He's educated enough to decode your meaning. You don't receive a reply for months, and when you finally do, it's devastating in its brevity and caution. "I wish you joy in the harvest season," he writes. "May the yield prove worthy of the gardener's efforts." Which translated means I hope the child is your husband's, because if it's mine, we're both dead and I can't bear thinking about that possibility. He's right to be cautious. Even this coded correspondence is risky. You burn his letter after reading it 17 times, committing every word to memory. Then you stop writing. Too dangerous. For both of you, your pregnancy progresses normally. You suffer the expected morning sickness, the exhaustion, the strange food cravings that have you demanding pickled herring at odd hours. Your body swells and changes in ways that are simultaneously miraculous and horrifying. Medieval pregnancy is dangerous. Women die in childbirth regularly, queens included. You're attended by the best midwives and physicians available, but that's still medieval medicine, which means a confusing mix of genuine helpful practices and absolute nonsense. Here's a quirky detail about medieval pregnancy beliefs. Physicians thought that what a pregnant woman looked at could influence her child's appearance. If you spent too much time looking at ugly people, your baby might be ugly. If you saw someone with a deformity, your child might develop similar features. So pregnant queens were encouraged to surround themselves with beauty-fine tapestries, handsome servants, pleasant landscapes. You find this both absurd and oddly comforting. At least looking at beautiful things is pleasant. Even if it doesn't actually affect fetal development, you also receive amulets and charms meant to protect you and the baby, religious relics, stones with supposed magical properties, prayers written on parchment that you're supposed to keep near your body. Some of this is sanctioned by the church. Some of it borders on the folk magic that priests officially condemn but everyone secretly practices. You accept all of it because refusing would seem suspicious, and also because you're desperate enough to hope that maybe, possibly, some supernatural force might help you through this impossible situation. Your husband is attentive during your pregnancy in ways he never was before. He visits more frequently, asking after your health, bringing you gifts, even occasionally sitting with you and making actual conversation. You realize with some bitterness that he values you more as an incubator for his potential heir than he ever did as a wife or person. But you play along, accepting his attention gracefully, because maintaining his good opinion is essential now more than ever. Do you remember those early months when you fantasized that maybe you could grow to love your husband? That perhaps your marriage might develop into genuine partnership, that hope is completely dead now? You see him clearly for what he is, not evil or cruel, but fundamentally selfish and emotionally limited. He's capable of affection for things that serve his interests, his hunting dogs, his favourite horses, his political allies, and now you as the vessel carrying his heir. But actual love, actually caring about another person's internal experience, you don't think he's capable of it, which makes you wonder sometimes, in your darker moments, whether you and Roland would have found each other so compelling if your marriage had been happier, if your husband had been kind, attentive, genuinely interested in you as a person. Would you have fallen for Roland's attention? Or was the affair only possible because of the vacuum of affection in your married life? You'll never know. And honestly, it doesn't matter. You made your choices. You followed your heart into forbidden territory. And now you're carrying the consequences literally inside your body. A child who will be either your ultimate success as a queen or the evidence that finally condemns you. The weeks pass. Your belly grows enormous. You move through the castle with increasing difficulty, attended constantly by midwives and ladies in waiting who monitor your every movement. You're not allowed privacy anymore. Pregnant queens are too valuable to be left alone where they might fall or injure themselves. It's suffocating, this constant supervision. But you endure it. You think about Roland constantly. Wonder if he's safe in the northern garrison. Wonder if he thinks about you, about the child you're carrying that might be his. Wonder if you'll ever see him again, or if your husband's strategic reassignment has permanently separated you. You dream about the birth. Sometimes they're good dreams, where the baby emerges clearly your husband's child, dark-haired like him, instantly recognizable as legitimate. Sometimes they're nightmares where the baby looks undeniably like Roland, and the moment the midwife places the infant in your arms, everyone knows, and guards are already moving to arrest you. You wake from these nightmares trembling, your hands instinctively protective over your swollen belly, whispering promises to the child inside you. "I'll protect you," you murmur in the darkness. "Whatever happens, I'll keep you safe." It's a promise you have no idea if you can keep. But it's all you have: love for a child you haven't met yet, determination to survive whatever consequences come from the choices you've made, and the fading memory of a man who made you feel human during a time when you were expected to be nothing but a royal function. 3 months until the birth. 3 months until you discover whether your forbidden love will remain secret, or whether your body is about to betray you to an entire kingdom. 3 months of waiting, wondering, and trying not to completely lose your mind from the anxiety of not knowing whether you're carrying your salvation or your doom. Labour begins on a cold November morning, 3 weeks earlier than the midwives predicted. You wake to cramping pain that steals your breath, and for a moment you lie there in the pre-dawn darkness thinking this can't be happening yet. You're not ready. You need more time to prepare yourself for whatever face you're about to see on this child who will determine your fate. But babies come when they choose, indifferent to their mother's redness or the political implications of their existence. The cramping intensifies, becomes rhythmic, undeniable. You call for your ladies in waiting and suddenly your chambers fill with activity, midwives summoned, hot water prepared, herbs brought for pain relief. Your husband notified that the heir he's been eagerly anticipating is finally arriving. Medieval childbirth is a women's affair. Your husband won't be present. Men are excluded from the birthing chamber, considered inappropriate witnesses to this female mystery. Instead, you're surrounded entirely by women midwives with decades of experience. Noble ladies who've borne their own children, servants who assist with the practical necessities of blood and water and pain. The room is closed off, windows shuttered, candles lit despite the morning light outside. You're entering a liminal space, separate from the normal world, where women have been bringing forth children and sometimes dying in the attempt since time began. The pain is extraordinary. Nobody quite prepared you for this. Oh, they warned you childbirth hurt, but the actual experience of your body ripping itself apart to expel a human being exceeds any description you'd received. Hours pass. The contractions come closer together, longer, harder. You walk when the midwives tell you to walk. You crouch when they position you in various poses meant to ease the baby's passage. You drink their herbal concoctions that taste like earth and bitterness and supposedly help with pain, though you can't tell if they're working. Between contractions, in those brief moments when the agony recedes enough for thought, you pray. Not the formal prayers you've recited your entire life, but desperate bargaining with God. Please let this child look like my husband. Please don't let my sins destroy an innocent baby. Please let me survive this and I'll never be reckless again. Please, please, please. Lady Catherine, the most senior of your ladies in waiting and the only one you've come close to trusting during your years as queen, holds your hand during the worst contractions. "You're doing well," she murmurs, "strong and brave, just as a queen should be." You almost laugh at that, except laughing while your body is being torn in half seems impossible. Strong and brave. If she knew the truth, if she knew you're terrified not just of the physical ordeal, but of what the baby's face might reveal, she'd think you cowardly and treasonous. Here's what medieval midwives actually knew that often gets overlooked. They were remarkably skilled at their profession. Yes, they lacked modern medical understanding of infection and anatomy, but they had centuries of accumulated practical wisdom about childbirth. They knew positioning techniques that genuinely helped labour progress. They understood when to intervene and when to let nature proceed. They could identify complications and had strategies not always successful, but better than nothing for addressing breech births. Prolonged labour, hemorrhaging. Your midwives are the best in the kingdom, and you're receiving better care than 99% of women in your era could access. But even the best medieval medicine can't guarantee survival. You know women who've died in childbirth young, healthy noble women who simply bled too much or developed fevers afterward, or had babies positioned wrong. Your husband's first wife died this way. It's why he needed you, needed another chance at an heir. If you die today, he'll probably marry again within a year, seeking his third attempt at producing legitimate sons. The thought is strangely clarifying. If you die, the question of paternity becomes irrelevant. Your potential treason dies with you, and your husband gets to try again with someone else. Part of you almost wishes for it not death exactly, but the escape from consequences, from having to see what you've created and know whether it condemns you. But you don't die. After 14 hours of labour that feel like 14 lifetimes, the baby finally crowns. The midwife barks instructions: push, wait, breathe, push again. Your body obeys automatically, beyond your conscious control now. Pure animal instinct driving this final stage. One more massive contraction, pressure and pain, and then sudden, shocking relief as the baby slides free into the midwife's waiting hands. "A son," the midwife announces triumphantly. "A healthy prince. A son. Your husband will be overjoyed. The kingdom has an heir. You fulfilled your primary function as queen. The celebrations will be enormous feasts, tournaments, Thanksgiving services, gifts distributed to mark this momentous occasion. But you're not thinking about any of that. You're staring at the midwife as she cleans the baby, waiting for the moment when she'll bring him to you, when you'll finally see his face and know. The midwife wraps him in soft cloth and places him in your arms. You look down at your son, this tiny person you've carried for months without knowing whether you represented salvation or doom. He has dark hair, thick for a newborn, plastered to his small skull. Your husband has dark hair. So does Roland, unhelpful. His eyes are the murky blue-grey that all babies have, which will change colour over the coming months. No information there yet. His face is red and wrinkled from birth, features not yet settled into their permanent form. He looks like a generic newborn, not clearly resembling anyone in particular. You breathe out slowly, relief washing through you almost as powerful as the physical relief of birth. He doesn't obviously look like Roland. Nothing about him screams foreign paternity to anyone glancing at him. If anything, the dark hair suggests your husband's colouring, which is what everyone will assume anyway, because why would they question it? He's beautiful, Lady Catherine says, peering at the baby with a genuine warmth. The king will be so pleased. Your husband is summoned and enters the birthing chamber, breaking protocol in his eagerness to see his heir. He looks at the baby, your baby, or your baby and Roland's baby. You still don't actually know, and his face splits into the widest smile you've ever seen on him. A son, he says, almost reverent. A healthy son. He looks at you then, and for perhaps the first time in your 3+ years of marriage, seems to truly see you as something other than a function. You've done well, very well indeed. The christening happens within days, as royal births demand. The baby is named after your husband's father, traditional, appropriate, politically smart. You stand at the cathedral font holding your infant son while the bishop performs the sacrament, and you try not to think about how this ceremony is blessing a child whose legitimacy you cannot personally guarantee. Historians still argue about how medieval people understood genetics and inheritance. They knew children resembled their parents, obviously, but they didn't have modern concepts of DNA or heredity. Medieval theories of conception were wildly wrong. Some physicians thought children were formed entirely from male seed, with women just providing nourishment. Others believed in various mixing theories. What they did understand was that legitimacy mattered more than biology. A child born in wedlock was legally the husband's child, period. As long as no one could prove otherwise, that legal reality stood firm. Your son, you call him Thomas in private. The name given at christening thrives in his first weeks. He feeds well, grows steadily, shows all signs of healthy development. You recover from birth better than many women. No dangerous fevers or excessive bleeding. The kingdom celebrates its new prince with genuine joy. And you fall in love. Not with your husband, who returns to his previous distance once the excitement of producing an heir fades, but with your baby, Thomas, this impossibly small person who depends entirely on you. You nurse him yourself, despite noble ladies usually employing wet nurses, wanting this intimate connection, this proof that whatever else is complicated about his existence, he's yours. Here's a quirky detail about medieval royal mothers: they often had more hands-on involvement with infant care than you might expect. Yes, noble babies had nurses and servants, but queens frequently nursed their own children. At least, initially. There was theological reasoning behind this. Medieval Christianity emphasized mother's milk as almost sacred, conveying not just nutrition but moral character. But beyond theology, it was also just the human reality of women wanting to bond with their babies. You're far from the first queen to insist on nursing her own son, despite having servants who could do it. 3 months after Thomas's birth, you receive a letter. It comes through a travelling merchant, hidden among other correspondence for the royal household, marked with the code you and Roland developed months ago. Your hands shake as you break the seal. He's heard about the birth news of a royal heir travels across kingdoms. He's careful in his language. Nothing explicitly incriminating, but you understand his real questions. Is the child mine? Are you safe? Are you happy? You write back, equally careful, equally coded. The harvest proved bountiful, and the yield resembles the official gardener in all respects. You tell him, which means the baby looks enough like my husband that no one questions paternity. The garden has returned to its expected rhythms, which means my life has returned to being the dutiful queen. No more scandal. The gardener maintains the grounds with contentment, which means I'm not in immediate danger. The crisis has passed. What you don't write, what you can't write even in code, I don't know whose son he is. I look at Thomas's face every day searching for signs of you, and sometimes I think I see your expressions in his movements, but I can't be certain if I'm really seeing resemblance or just hoping for it. I love him regardless. I love you still, even though we're separated by hundreds of miles and impossible circumstances. I think about you constantly. I miss you in ways that make breathing feel difficult. This half-life where I perform queenly duties while my heart belongs to someone else is slowly killing me. But I don't know how to escape it, or even if escape is possible. You don't write any of that because it's too dangerous, too revealing. Instead, you keep your letter brief and ambiguous and burn it immediately after sending it, eliminating evidence of correspondence. Your life settles into new patterns. You're good queen again in everyone's estimation. You've produced an heir, fulfilled your primary duty, proven your value. Your husband treats you with considerably more respect, though still not affection. He visits your chambers occasionally. Hoping for additional children, spare heirs are always desirable, but without the desperate frequency of those months before Thomas's conception. The rumours about you and Roland have faded almost completely. With him gone for over a year and you having obviously devoted yourself to motherhood and queenly duties, there's nothing to sustain speculation. Lady Agnes has moved on to gossiping about other people's indiscretions. The court has new scandals to discuss. You should feel relieved. The danger has passed. You've survived what could have been catastrophic. You have a healthy son and restored reputation and secure position as queen. Instead, you feel hollow. You're performing life rather than living it, going through motions, fulfilling roles, existing but not truly present. You love Thomas desperately, but even that love is tinged with guilt and uncertainty about his paternity. You're physically safe but emotionally dying, bit by bit, day by day, year after year, stretching ahead of you in this gilded prison of duty and appearance. You wonder if Roland feels the same in his northern exile. You wonder if he thinks about you during long garrison nights. You wonder if you'll ever see him again, ever speak to him again, or if your affair is now just memory, 6 months of connection that will have to sustain you through decades of separation. You look at your son sleeping into his carved wooden cradle, his small fists curled against his cheeks, and you whisper the question you'll never know the answer to. Who are you? Whose eyes will you have when they change from a baby blue? Whose smile will I see in your face as you grow? Thomas sleeps on, innocent of the complicated history that preceded his birth, the dangerous love and forbidden desire and terrible gamble that might or might not have created him. And you, his mother, the queen who chose passion over safety, sit beside his cradle and try to convince yourself that surviving is enough, even when it feels like slowly drowning. 2 years pass. Thomas grows from infant to toddler, learning to walk and speak and exist as a small person with his own personality, emerging like flowers through spring snow. He's bright, curious, affectionate. He laughs easily and asks endless questions and follows you around the castle like a devoted puppy when duties permit. You love him with an intensity that sometimes frightens you. This fierce maternal bond that transcends any questions about biology or legitimacy. And here's what you notice as he grows. He has your husband's colouring, but not quite your husband's features. His eyes settled into a grey blue that could be either your husband's dark blue or Roland's grey, depending on lighting. His face is taking shape with your cheekbones, but a jaw structure that doesn't match either man distinctly. He's becoming his own person rather than an obvious copy of anyone, which is simultaneously reassuring and frustrating. You still don't know. You probably never will know with certainty. Your husband dotes on Thomas in his limited way, proud of having an heir, pleased when the boy shows early signs of intelligence or physical coordination. But he's not particularly involved in daily childcare. That's your domain, assisted by nurses and servants. Your husband appears for formal occasions, teaches Thomas to ride a pony, commissions a miniature sword for the boy to play with, father as distant authority figure rather than warm presence. Medieval parenting, especially royal parenting, doesn't typically involve hands-on paternal devotion. You've heard nothing from Roland in 18 months. The letters stopped too risky to maintain correspondence, too painful to keep reaching across impossible distance. You don't know if he's still at the northern garrison or if he's been reassigned elsewhere or, terrifyingly, if something happened to him in one of the border skirmishes that occasionally flare in that region. Knights die in service. It happens. The thought that Roland could be dead and you'd never know, that you'd simply never receive another letter and have to wonder forever, it keeps you awake some nights, staring at the ceiling of your chambers while your husband snores beside you. Then everything changes in a single afternoon. You're in the gardens with Thomas, watching him chase butterflies with the uncoordinated enthusiasm of a 2-year-old. When a servant approaches, "My lady, the king requests your presence in the great hall. There are visitors from the northern garrison." Your heart stops, literally stops for a full beat before slamming back into frantic rhythm. Visitors from the northern garrison, where Roland was posted, where he might still be. The servant doesn't seem to think there is anything unusual about the summons routine military delegation, probably reporting to the king about border conditions. But you know, somehow you know before you even enter the hall that he's here, that after 2 years of separation you are about to see him again, and you have no idea how you are going to maintain composure. You leave Thomas with his nurses. Take a few moments to check your appearance. You're not vain, but you want to look. What queenly beautiful, like the memory he's been carrying all of it, none of it, and make your way to the great hall. Your husband sits in his throne with several nobles around him, and there, among a group of knights in travel-stained gear clearly just arrived from a long journey, is Roland. He looks different, older, harder. The softness that education and court life preserved has been burned away by 2 years of garrison duty on a harsh frontier. There's a new scar across his left eyebrow, and his face is leaner, more weathered, but his eyes, when they meet yours for that brief, careful moment as you enter his eyes, are the same. Grey-blue and full of everything you can't say aloud. "Ah, my dear," your husband says, gesturing you forward. "These knights have just returned from the northern garrison with reports of the border situation. I thought you might be interested to hear of conditions there." Which is unusual, your husband rarely includes you in military briefings, but perhaps he's testing something. Watching your reaction to Roland's presence after 2 years? Or perhaps he genuinely thinks you'll find border defense logistics interesting because you've become such a dedicated queen, you can't tell. You take your seat beside your husband and arrange your face into polite interest. You look at Roland the same way you look at the other knights, pleasant, neutral, giving him no more attention than any other loyal servant of the crown. Inside, you're screaming. He's alive. He's here. He's standing 20 feet away and you can't touch him, can't speak to him privately, can't do anything but perform indifference while your heart threatens to break through your ribcage. The military briefing is interminable. Knights report on fortification improvements, troop rotations, skirmishes with raiders from across the border. Your husband asks questions about supply lines and winter preparedness. Nobles offer opinions on strategic priorities. You sit through all of it, nodding occasionally, while internally counting the seconds until this torture ends and maybe, possibly, you might find a way to speak with Roland alone. Do you remember learning patience as a child, how your mother taught you to sit still during long religious services? To endure boredom without fidgeting? You're calling on every lesson in royal composure you've ever received. Your hands are folded calmly in your lap even though they want to shake. Your expression remains pleasantly interested even though you want to scream. You're a perfect queen, utterly in control. Finally, mercifully, the briefing concludes. Your husband dismisses the delegation, telling them there'll be guests at court for several days before returning north. My wife manages our hospitality arrangements, he adds, which is true. Organising accommodations for visiting dignitaries falls within your queenly duties. She'll ensure you're properly housed and provided for during your stay, which gives you legitimate reason to speak with the delegation. Not suspicious at all. Just the queen performing her expected role. You wait a careful interval, not too eager, not too delayed before seeking out the visiting knights to discuss their accommodation needs. You find them in the garrison quarters, being shown to temporary chambers by your household steward. You dismiss the steward, claiming you want to personally welcome these men who've served so far from home, and suddenly you're in the corridor with Roland and 3 other knights who don't know the history, don't understand why the air feels electric with everything unsaid. My lords, you address all of them equally. I trust your chambers are adequate. Is there anything you require during your stay? The other knights respond with appropriate thanks and minor requests, extra candles, warmer blankets, nothing unusual. And then Roland speaks for the first time in 2 years, his voice exactly as you remembered it, and also somehow different, roughened by weather and shouting commands across training grounds. Your Majesty is most gracious, sir, he says, formal and correct. We require nothing beyond what has been provided. Though perhaps, he hesitates, and you can see him calculating risk. If your Majesty has time to hear more detailed accounts of conditions in the north, I've kept journals that might interest the court, chronicles of daily garrison life, observations of the region. It's a code. He's offering you a reason to meet privately to review his journals that definitely don't exist. The other knights look mildly puzzled but not suspicious. You maintain perfect composure. How thoughtful, you reply smoothly. I do enjoy chronicles. Perhaps you could bring them to the library tomorrow afternoon. I often spend time there reviewing household records. We could examine your observations then. Of course, Your Majesty. Historians still argue about how medieval people conducted secret affairs in environments as crowded and surveillance-prone as royal courts. The answer is very carefully, using legitimate activities as cover, taking advantage of the fact that courts were simultaneously intimate and chaotic, everyone living in close quarters, but with enough daily activity that brief absences or private conversations could be explained. Queens did have some private spaces and autonomy of movement that made discreet meetings possible, though always risky. The next afternoon feels like walking through water. Every moment stretches, time itself resisting your desperate need to see him, speak to him, understand what 2 years have done to whatever existed between you. You go about your morning duties in a fog, reviewing accounts with your steward, settling a dispute between servants, spending time with Thomas, who seems to sense your distraction and becomes unusually clingy. Finally, afternoon arrives. You go to the library, ostensibly to review household records as you mentioned. The library is one of the few places you can be alone without immediate suspicion. Queens are expected to be pious and educated. Spending time with books is appropriately feminine and virtuous. You dismiss the servant who typically assists you, claiming you want quiet for concentration. Roland arrives precisely when expected, carrying papers that could plausibly be journals but are probably just blank parchment. He closes the library door behind him, not locked. That would be too obvious, but closed enough for privacy. For a long moment you just look at each other. 2 years, 2 years of separation, of wondering, of trying to move on and failing, of carrying memories like wounds that won't heal. You had a son, he says finally. Not a question, just acknowledgement. I did. Your voice sounds strange to your own ears, thick with emotion you're trying to contain. Does he... Roland trails off, unable to finish the question. But you know what he's asking. Does the child look like me? Is he mine? Did our recklessness create a human being who might someday threaten both our lives? He looks like a child, you say carefully. Dark hair, grey-blue eyes that might change. Features that don't clearly match anyone yet. He's... You take a breath. I don't know. Roland, I honestly don't know whose son he is, and I probably never will unless he grows into obvious resemblance to one of you. But everyone believes he's the king's son. Yes. Why would they think otherwise? I'm the queen. I was sleeping with my husband during the relevant period. The baby doesn't look suspicious. There's no reason for anyone to question legitimacy. Here's a quirky historical detail that's relevant to your situation. Medieval people believed that a woman could be pregnant by 2 different men simultaneously, that one coupling could somehow fertilize multiple eggs leading to children with different fathers. This wasn't true, obviously, but the belief existed and occasionally showed up in legal disputes about paternity. The science was wrong, but the underlying anxiety was real when women had multiple sexual partners during conception windows. Paternity really could be ambiguous in ways that threatened inheritance and legitimacy. I thought about you every day, Roland says softly. Every cold night in that garrison, every boring patrol, every moment when life felt like just waiting to die in some pointless border skirmish. I thought about you and wondered if you were safe, if you were happy, if you'd forgotten me. Forgotten you? You nearly laugh, except it would come out as a sob. Roland, you're all I think about. I perform my role, good queen, devoted mother, dutiful wife, and the entire time I'm thinking about you, wondering where you are, missing you, hating that I miss you because what good does it do we can't be together? This you gesture between you has no future. It never did. Your being here now just reminds me of everything I can't have. Then tell me to leave. Tell me to request permanent posting at the Northern Garrison, to stay away from court, to never see you again. His voice is low, intense. Tell me, and I'll do it. Because being this close to you and not being able to touch you is torture. But if you moved on, if you want me gone, you cross the space between you before consciously deciding to move, you kiss him desperately. 2 years of longing compressed into this moment. And he responds immediately, his arms coming around you like he's trying to physically hold together something that's been broken. It's reckless. It's stupid. Anyone could walk in. But you don't care because for the first time in 2 years you feel alive. Really alive. Not just performing life, but experiencing it with full intensity. When you finally break apart, you're both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, and you realise you're crying. I can't do this, you whisper. I can't have you here and not have you. It's impossible. I know. You should go back north. Permanently. It's safer for both of us. I know. Neither of you moves. And you realise with sinking certainty that whatever you thought ended 2 years ago hasn't ended at all. It's just been waiting, dormant like winter bulbs, for the right conditions to bloom again into dangerous, beautiful, impossible life. Roland stays at court for 2 weeks, and they're the best and worst 2 weeks of your life since Thomas was born. You steal moments, brief meetings in the library, ostensibly discussing his non-existent garrison journals. A conversation in the chapel that looks like the Queen offering spiritual counsel to a faithful knight. 10 minutes in the herb garden where you pretend to consult him about which plants might grow in the northern climate. every encounter is chaperoned by the need for appearances. Never long enough, always ending too soon. But even these fragments feel like oxygen after suffocation. Just seeing him across the great hall during evening meals makes your heart race. Knowing he's somewhere in the castle, breathing the same air, existing in your proximity, it's simultaneously torturous and wonderful. You introduce him to Thomas. You have to, it would be strange not to present your son to visiting knights. And avoiding Roland specifically would draw exactly the attention you're trying to avoid. So one afternoon in the garden, with nurses and other children present, you let Roland meet the boy who might be his son. Thomas, being 2, is unimpressed with the scarred knight and more interested in a wooden horse he's been playing with. But you watch Roland's face as he looks at the child, see him searching for resemblance, for proof, for any answer to the question that's haunted you both. You see the exact moment he gives up, accepts that he can't know, that this beautiful, oblivious toddler playing with toys contains a mystery that will never be fully solved. He's fortunate in his mother, Roland says quietly, the only personal comment he allows himself. He's fortunate in many things, you reply, equally careful with servants nearby. A stable kingdom, a father who values him, good health, fortune smiles on him. What you're both not saying, fortune didn't smile on us. We found each other at exactly the wrong time in exactly the wrong circumstances. And now we're trapped in this impossible situation where love exists but cannot be acted upon, where desire remains but must be strangled, where everything we want is forbidden. Lady Agnes is watching you again. You notice her sharp eyes tracking whenever you're in the same room as Roland, measuring the distance between you, analysing your expressions. She never got her dramatic scandal 2 years ago, and you suspect she's hoping for a reprise now that the supposed object of your previous indiscretion has returned to court. You're extremely careful around her, extra formal with Roland when she's present, giving her nothing concrete to report. But gossip doesn't need concrete evidence. Rumours start circulating again, whispered speculation about why the Queen seems to spend so much time arranging accommodations for the northern garrison visitors, why she's consulting with that particular knight about plants and logistics, why she looks happier than she has in months. The whispers are vague, nothing actionable, but they're there, rustling through the court like wind through dry leaves. Your husband hears them. Of course he hears them. Kings have more spies and informants than anyone, and rumours about the Queen's virtue always reach royal ears eventually. He doesn't confront you directly this time. Instead, he does something worse. He offers Roland a permanent position at court. It happens during a formal audience when Roland and the other garrison knights are preparing to return north. Your husband announces that he's been impressed by the reports from the northern garrison, that Roland in particular has shown exceptional leadership and dedication. "I'm recalling you to court," your husband declares. "You'll serve in my personal guard, a position of honour and responsibility." On the surface, it's a promotion, a reward for good service. Knights usually spend years hoping for recall from frontier duty to prestigious positions at court. Roland should be grateful, honoured, delighted. Instead, you watch his face and see the trap closing, because your husband isn't rewarding him, he's keeping him close, keeping him where you'll see each other constantly, where the temptation will be unbearable, where eventually you'll slip up and provide the proof of adultery that your husband can use however he chooses politically. It's brilliant, really, in a cruel way. If your husband sent Roland away again, he'd look jealous and suspicious. But recalling him to court that looks magnanimous, trusting, the act of a king who has complete confidence in his wife's virtue and his own authority, it gives your husband perfect cover to watch you both, to wait for the inevitable mistake, to gather evidence at his leisure. Historians still argue about how much medieval kings actually cared about their wives' fidelity versus how much they cared about appearances and political implications. Some kings genuinely loved their wives and were devastated by betrayal. Others treated marriage as purely political and only prosecuted adultery when it threatened succession or their authority. Your husband seems to fall into the latter category. He doesn't appear personally heartbroken by the possibility you might love someone else. But he's very interested in maintaining control and authority. If you're conducting an affair, he wants to know about it so he can decide how and when to use that information. Roland has no choice but to accept the position with appropriate gratitude. Refusing would be insulting, suspicious, potentially career-ending. So he bows and thanks the king and agrees to remain at court. And you watch this happen while maintaining your perfect queenly composure, even though inside you're screaming because you know exactly what your husband is doing. That night you find a note slipped under your chamber door, reckless, dangerous, but Roland is clearly as desperate as you are. He knows, the note says simply, or suspects. Either way, we're being watched. We have to stop this. For real this time. I can't be the reason you're destroyed. He's right. You know he's right. Your husband is circling like a predator who's detected blood in the water, waiting for you to make a definitive mistake. Continuing any kind of relationship with Roland now is suicidal. But here's what you've learned. Over the past few years, the heart doesn't care about logic. Desire doesn't respond to rational argument. You can know something is dangerous and still want it desperately. You can understand that you're walking toward a cliff and still be unable to stop moving. You burn Roland's note and try to convince yourself you have the strength to end this. 3 days later, you're in the chapel late at night, not unusual. Queens often pray at odd hours, demonstrating their piety. Roland happens to also be there, ostensibly seeking spiritual guidance after evening duties. The chapel is empty except for you both and the eternal flame that burns before the altar. "We can't keep doing this," you whisper, not looking at him, both of you kneeling at prayer benches like proper penitents. "I know. Your being here, at court, constantly near but untouchable, it's torture. I know." "So what do we do?" You finally turn to look at him, and in the flickering candlelight his face is anguished, conflicted, as torn as you feel. "We do our duty," he says quietly. "I serve your husband faithfully. You continue being the perfect queen. We exist in the same space but never touch, never speak privately, never give anyone evidence of impropriety. We slowly die inside while looking perfectly fine outside. That's not a solution. That's just prolonged suffering. It's the only solution that doesn't end with both of us dead or exiled or disgraced." He's right. And you hate that he's right. Here's a quirky detail about medieval religious life that's relevant to your current situation. Churches and chapels were simultaneously public and private spaces. Anyone could enter to pray, so being there wasn't inherently suspicious. But they were also spaces where people expected privacy for spiritual contemplation, where conversations could happen without seeming overtly secret. Many medieval affairs involved meetings in churches precisely because they offered this combination of accessibility and discretion. Of course, this also meant that people knew churches were places affairs happened, so they weren't really as safe as they seemed. You're gambling that your established pattern of frequent chapel visits makes this encounter unremarkable, but it's still dangerous. "I love you," you say suddenly, because you've never said it aloud, and if you're going to end this, really end it. This time you need him to know. "I've loved you since that first garden conversation. I love you now." I'll probably love you for the rest of my life. And it doesn't matter because love isn't enough to overcome the reality of who we are and what's at stake. I love you too. His voice breaks slightly. I've loved you since I saw you laugh at that performance. Since I realized you were a real person trapped inside that queenly role. I love you enough that I'm willing to walk away rather than destroy you. You sit in the chapel in silence, both crying quietly, mourning what you can't have. This is your real goodbye, not the dramatic declarations of romantic ballads, but this quiet, aching acknowledgement that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes circumstances win. Sometimes duty and safety and survival have to take precedence over desire. We should leave separately, you finally say, standing up and wiping your face, reconstructing your queenly composure. You first. I'll stay and pray for another hour so it doesn't look connected. He stands too, and for a moment you think he's going to embrace you one last time. Instead, he bows formal. Correct. The proper respect a knight shows his queen. Thank you for your spiritual counsel, your majesty. He says loudly enough that anyone who might be listening outside would hear proper deference rather than intimacy. May God guide your service to the crown. You reply in your queen voice. Equally formal, he leaves. You sink back onto the prayer bench and actually pray, this time desperate. Honest prayers for strength, for the ability to endure what cannot be changed, for forgiveness for the ways you failed every role you're supposed to fill. You stay in that chapel for 2 hours, until your knees ache and the candles burn lower and you've cried yourself empty. Then you stand, arrange your veil, reconstruct your queenly mask, and walk back to your chambers to sleep alone in your oversized bed and wake tomorrow to continue the performance of a life you barely recognize as your own. Roland remains at court. You see him constantly during training exercises, at meals, in corridors, standing guard during official functions. You speak to him only when absolutely necessary, with perfect formality, treating him exactly like any other knight in your husband's service and wonder. You give your husband no ammunition, no evidence, no reason to believe the rumours are anything more than malicious gossip. And slowly, painfully, you teach yourself to function in this new reality, where the man you love exists in your daily life, but might as well be on another continent for all the access you have to him, where duty really does triumph over desire, where you become the perfect queen everyone wants you to be, even if it means killing the parts of yourself that make you human. You spend more time with Thomas, pouring into motherhood all the love and connection you can't express elsewhere. You expand your charitable works, becoming known throughout the kingdom for your generosity and piety. You support your husband's political initiatives, play your role in court politics, maintain your reputation as a model queen, and late at night, alone in your chambers, you allow yourself 5 minutes to remember what it felt like to be seen, to be loved, to be yourself rather than a function. 5 minutes where you hold the memory of Roland's voice, his touch, his eyes meeting yours with understanding and desire. 5 minutes where you let yourself feel the loss. Then you put it away, lock it back in whatever internal compartment holds all the things queens aren't allowed to want, and you sleep and wake and perform another day of being the woman everyone needs you to be instead of the woman you actually are. It's not happiness, but it's survival, and sometimes survival is the best you can hope for. You maintain the performance for 8 months. 8 months of existing in the same castle, breathing the same air, seeing each other daily and never touching, never speaking beyond formal necessity. You become expert at not looking at Roland, your eyes slide past him in crowds, focus elsewhere when he's nearby. Give no indication that he's any different from the dozens of other knights in your husband's service. You're a perfect queen, above reproach, devoted to duty and family and kingdom." And then Lady Agnes makes her move. She requests a private audience with you, which isn't unusual. Your ladies-in-waiting occasionally need to discuss household matters or personal concerns. You receive her in your solar on a grey afternoon in early spring, expecting perhaps a request for leave to visit her family or some complaint about another servant. Instead, she closes the door carefully and turns to you with an expression you immediately recognise as dangerous. "Your Majesty," she begins, her voice dripping with false concern, "I come to you as a loyal servant who wishes only to protect your reputation and the dignity of the crown." Your stomach drops. You know exactly where this is going, but you keep your face neutral, queenly. "I appreciate your loyalty, Lady Agnes. What concerns you? There are whispers at court, Your Majesty, troubling whispers about your relationship with a certain knight, Sir Roland of House Beaumont, specifically." She pauses, watching your reaction carefully. You give her nothing, no flinch, no change in expression, just mild, polite interest as though she's discussing weather patterns. "People at court will gossip about anything," you say calmly. "I cannot control what idle servants choose to whisper about." "Of course not, Your Majesty. But these whispers are becoming persistent, detailed. People speak of meetings in the library, the chapel, the gardens. They note how you seem to arrange accommodations personally for garrison visitors. They remember the rumours from 2 years ago, before Sir Roland was sent north." Her smile is sharp, predatory. "I thought you should know what's being said, so you might take steps to protect your reputation." What she means, what she's really saying beneath the false concern I know about the affair, or at least I'm confident enough to gamble on it. And unless you give me something I want, I'm taking this information to the king. This is the moment, right here, where you can try to buy her silence or where you can shut her down so completely she won't dare pursue this further. Medieval court politics are ruthless threats and counter-threats, information as currency, everyone manoeuvring for position and advantage. You stand, drawing yourself to full queenly height, and let ice enter your voice. "Lady Agnes, let me be perfectly clear about something. You're suggesting that I, the Queen, have conducted an illicit affair with one of my husband's knights. Do you have proof of this accusation? Letters, witnesses to actual impropriety? Anything beyond vague whispers and your own speculation?" She hesitates, just slightly. "I have observations, Your Majesty, patterns of behaviour that suggest..." "Suggestions are not proof." You cut her off sharply. "Here's what I observe a lady-in-waiting who has served in my household for 3 years without significant advancement, who clearly hoped to gain influence through information gathering, who is now gambling that accusations against me might prove valuable to someone. Perhaps to the king, perhaps to rival noble families who'd benefit from scandal touching the crown. But here's your problem, Lady Agnes. Without proof, you have nothing, and making baseless accusations against the Queen is itself treasonous." You let that word hang in the air. Treason, the charge that leads to arrest, trial, possible execution. "I'm not accusing Your Majesty." She backpedals quickly. "I'm merely warning you of what others are saying. And I appreciate the warning." Your voice is still cold, controlled. "Now let me offer you some advice. If you wish to continue serving in my household, you'll forget these rumours immediately. You'll actively discourage others from spreading them. And you'll remember that queens have long memories for both loyalty and betrayal. Do we understand each other?" She's pale now, realising she miscalculated. She thought you'd be frightened, defensive, willing to bargain. Instead, you've reminded her that you hold more power than she does. that threatening a queen is considerably more dangerous than she apparently considered. Yes, your majesty. Perfectly. Good, you're dismissed. She leaves quickly, and you sink back into your chair, hands shaking now that the confrontation is over. You won that round, intimidated her into silence through pure authority and veiled threats. But the underlying problem hasn't disappeared. She might be silenced, but others are clearly talking. The whispers are loud enough that even a minor lady-in-waiting felt confident approaching you with thinly veiled blackmail. Your husband will hear the rumours eventually if he hasn't already. And unlike Lady Agnes, he has the power to actually investigate, to question servants under threat of punishment, to search for evidence, to make the rumours matter. You need to end this definitively. Not just avoid Roland, not just maintain propriety, but actively create a narrative that makes the rumours seem absurd. So you do something you've been avoiding for the past 8 months. You become genuinely warm toward your husband. Not dramatically sudden personality changes would be suspicious, but gradually, over the following weeks, you soften toward him. You smile more in his presence. You initiate conversations about his political concerns, his military strategies, the daily business of ruling. You ask his opinions and actually listen to his answers. You invite him to spend time with Thomas, facilitating father-son bonding that makes you all look like a proper royal family. You resume welcoming his conjugal visits with apparent pleasure rather than dutiful tolerance. It's a performance, like everything else in your life. But it's a convincing one, and it works. Your husband responds to the attention, becomes more affectionate in return, starts treating you more like a partner than a possession. The court notices gossip, always notices relationship dynamics, and the whispers shift. The king and queen seem quite devoted lately. People murmur. Look how they laugh together at dinner. See how the queen gazes at the king during ceremonies. Oh, if you're so clearly devoted to your husband, the logic goes, how could rumours of an affair be true? The two narratives can't coexist comfortably, so the affair rumours begin to fade again. Dismissed as malicious nonsense about a faithful queen, historians still argue about whether medieval queens ever successfully navigated adultery accusations through pure performance and political manoeuvring. Some clearly did queens whose rumoured affairs never resulted in prosecution, who maintained their positions and influence despite whispered scandal. Others were less fortunate, destroyed by accusations that might or might not have been true. The difference often came down to evidence, politics, and how effectively the queen could control narrative and perception. But here's the cost of your successful performance. You have to watch Roland suffer through it. You see his face during banquets when you're laughing at your husband's jokes, playing the adoring wife. You catch his expression when you and your husband display public affection, nothing inappropriate for a married couple. Just hand-holding or walking arm in arm, but enough to signal marital unity. You know he understands why you're doing it, that he recognizes the political necessity. But that doesn't make it hurt less. And it doesn't hurt less for you either. Every smile at your husband feels like betrayal. Every moment of manufactured warmth is a moment stolen from authentic feeling. You're burying the parts of yourself that loved Roland, that wanted something real instead of performed, that believed for a brief moment you could be a person instead of just a function. Thomas turns 3, and you throw him a lavish celebration partly because you genuinely love your son, partly because it's another opportunity to showcase your family unity, your role as devoted mother and wife. The festivities last 3 days, with tournaments and feasts and entertainment. Roland participates in the tournament, fighting competently but not brilliantly. He's better than he shows. You know this. But he's deliberately not drawing attention to himself. staying safely in the middle ranks of knights. During the feast, you sit at the high table with your husband and Thomas, the picture of royal family contentment. You applaud the tournament victors. You smile at noble well-wishers who congratulate you on your son's birthday. You play your role so perfectly that even you almost believe it. Late that night, after the celebrations end and Thomas is asleep and your husband has retired to his own chambers, you stand at your window looking out at the darkened castle grounds. You can see the knights' quarters from here. Can imagine Roland in one of those rooms, alone with his thoughts just as you're alone with yours. You've saved yourselves. By destroying any hope of connection, by choosing survival over authenticity, by performing devotion so convincingly that rumours lose their power, you've saved yourselves. You'll live. You'll maintain your positions. Years will pass and eventually this will all fade into distant memory. Just another episode in your long reign as queen. But you've lost something essential in the process. The knowledge that you could feel genuinely alive. That connection between souls was possible even in impossible circumstances. That love, however forbidden and doomed, existed as something real rather than strategic or performative. You're not sure which is worse, the loneliness you felt before Roland, when you didn't know what you were missing, or the loneliness you feel now, knowing exactly what real connection feels like and knowing you can never have it again. Here's a quirky detail about medieval castle architecture that feels metaphorically perfect for your situation. Castles were built with multiple layers of defence: outer walls, inner walls, keeps, moats, each layer designed to protect the precious, vulnerable centre from external threats, but those defensive layers also trapped the people inside. The same walls that kept enemies out also kept inhabitants in, protection and imprisonment, simultaneously. You've built defensive layers around your heart now. Performing devotion to your husband is your outer wall. Avoiding private contact with Roland is your moat. Killing your own desires is your innermost keep. You're defended perfectly against scandal, discovery, consequences, and completely trapped within walls of your own construction. A servant knocks softly one of your ladies, checking if you need anything before retiring. You turn from the window, reconstruct your queenly composure, and assure her you're fine. Then you prepare for bed, lie down in your oversized chamber, and try to sleep despite the crushing weight of all the things you can't feel, can't say, can't want. Tomorrow you'll wake and perform another day of being the perfect queen. And the day after that, and the day after that. Years of performance stretching ahead like an endless road leading nowhere you actually want to go. But you'll survive. That's what queens do. They survive. They endure. They sacrifice everything personal for duty and dynasty, and the careful maintenance of power structures that care nothing for human hearts. You close your eyes and try not to dream of gardens and forbidden kisses, and a man whose eyes saw you as more than a crown. Try not to dream of the life you could have lived if you'd been born in different circumstances. A different era. A different world where love mattered more than legitimacy and connection trumped protocol. The facade holds for another year. You're the model queen-devoted wife. Loving mother, pious benefactor, gracious hostess. Your husband seems genuinely pleased with this improved version of his marriage, never suspecting it's entirely performance. The rumours fade to nothing, dismissed as old gossip about a woman who's clearly dedicated to her family and royal duties. Even Lady Agnes seems convinced, or at least silenced, no longer watching you with that calculating speculation. Roland remains at court, a permanent fixture in your husband's personal guard. You've perfected the art of not seeing him. He exists in your peripheral vision, acknowledged with the same distant courtesy you show all knights. Nothing special, nothing suspicious. If anyone studied you both carefully, they'd conclude you barely know each other beyond standard court interaction, which is exactly what you want them to conclude. But fate, it turns out, has other ideas about how your story should unfold. It starts with Thomas, your beautiful, bright, increasingly verbal 3-year-old who's developing his own personality, his own mannerisms, his own way of moving through the world. And one afternoon, watching him play in the gardens, you see something that makes your blood freeze. He tilts his head when he's thinking, considering a problem. It's a distinctive gesture, not a common movement everyone makes, but something specific, particular. And you've seen it before. You've seen Roland do exactly that same head tilt, that same thoughtful angle, hundreds of times. You tell yourself it's coincidence. Lots of people tilt their heads. It doesn't mean anything. But then Thomas laughs at something, a deep, genuine belly laugh, and the sound is wrong. Not wrong exactly, but different from your husband's laugh. Different from your laugh. It echoes with timbre and rhythm that you recognise from library conversations and garden meetings and chapel encounters. Roland's laugh. You start noticing other things. The way Thomas's eyes crinkle when he smiles. The shape of his hands as he grows. Small gestures and expressions that you might not have noticed if you weren't looking. But now that you're looking, you can't unsee them. Your son, who you've been praying would resemble your husband clearly enough to eliminate all doubt, is starting to look like Roland. Not obviously. Not in ways that would be clear to people who don't know Roland intimately. But you know him intimately. You've studied his face, memorized his expressions, absorbed every detail during stolen moments over months. And now you're seeing those details emerge in your child. Your husband doesn't notice. Why would he? Thomas has dark hair like him. And that's enough evidence of paternity for a man who's never studied Roland's features, who doesn't know what specific gestures or expressions to look for. To your husband, Thomas is simply his son, similar enough in colouring, developing appropriately, showing no obvious signs of foreign paternity. But you know, and the knowing is destroying you. You become obsessed with studying Thomas, cataloguing every feature, every expression, trying to determine if you're imagining the resemblance or if it's genuinely there. Some days you convince yourself it's paranoia, projection, your mind seeing what it fears. Other days the resemblance seems undeniable, and you panic about when others might notice. Do you remember learning about heredity as a child, the basic understanding that children inherit traits from parents, that lineages can be traced through physical characteristics? Medieval people understood this not with modern genetic precision, but enough to recognize family resemblances, to use physical traits as evidence of legitimacy or bastardy. If Thomas continues developing Roland's mannerisms and expressions, eventually someone other than you will notice. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but eventually. Here's what medieval courts did with suspected bastards if the child's paternity was seriously questioned. The consequences range from disinheritance to execution of both mother and child. The specific outcome depended on politics, power, and how useful the scandal was to various factions. Some bastards were quietly set aside, removed from succession but allowed to live. Others weren't so fortunate. Queens accused of bearing bastards were killed to prevent any question about legitimate succession. The children themselves were either executed, sent to monasteries, or if very lucky raised in obscurity somewhere far from court. You can't let that happen to Thomas, whatever the truth of his paternity. He's your child. You've loved him from the moment of birth. You've nursed him, played with him, taught him to walk and speak and exist in the world. The thought of anyone harming him because of choices you made, choices he had no part in, is unbearable. So you make a decision. If Thomas is going to survive, if you're all going to survive, Roland has to leave court. Permanently. The longer he stays in proximity to Thomas, the more likely someone will notice the resemblances that are becoming clearer to you daily. Distance is the only safety. Getting Roland to leave without making it look like banishment or punishment requires careful manoeuvring. You need him gone, but in a way that seems like advancement or voluntary choice rather than forced exile. After weeks of considering options, you find your opportunity. Your husband's younger brother governs a significant province in the southern part of the kingdom. He's been requesting additional military support, more knights to help maintain order in the region with recurring bandit problems. It's a legitimate posting, important enough to be prestigious but distant enough to serve your purposes, 300 miles away. Far enough that casual resemblances wouldn't be noticed. You suggest to your husband, carefully and privately, that Sir Roland might be an excellent choice for this southern posting. You've observed his competence and dedication. You tell your husband, and he seems ready for greater responsibility. Your brother-in-law would benefit from such a capable knight. It would demonstrate the Crown's support for regional governance. Your husband agrees readily. He values your input on household and personnel matters. And you've been so supportive lately that he's inclined to accommodate your suggestions. Besides, it's a reasonable proposal. Roland does seem capable, and sending good knights to support regional lords is standard practice. The orders are drawn up. Roland will leave within the month for permanent posting to your husband's brother's household in the south. A promotion, technically, certainly not a punishment, just routine military deployment. You arrange to tell him yourself another of your queenly duties, informing household members of reassignments. You find him in the training yard. Call him aside under the pretext of discussing logistics for his new posting. You walk together to a relatively private corner of the courtyard, still visible to others but out of immediate earshot. You're being sent south. You tell him without preamble, to serve my husband's brother. It's already decided. He studies your face, and you see him understanding immediately that this is your doing. Why? Because Thomas is starting to look like you. Your voice is barely above a whisper. The way he tilts his head, his laugh. Little things that I see because I know you, but that others might eventually notice if you're constantly present. For his safety, for all our safety, you need to be far away from court. Roland closes his eyes briefly, absorbing this. He's mine. Then, our son. I don't know for certain, I'll never know for certain, but the resemblances are there, and they're growing more apparent. Whether he's biologically yours or whether he just happened to inherit features that echo yours, it doesn't matter. What matters is keeping him safe. Keeping all of us safe. By sending me away again. His voice is flat. Defeated. By sending you somewhere you can build a life. A good posting. Prestigious. With opportunities for advancement. You could marry. Start a family of your own actual children you can acknowledge and raise. You could have a real life instead of this half-existence at court where we torture each other with proximity we can't act on. Historians still argue about how many medieval knights maintained secret relationships with queens or noblewomen while simultaneously marrying and raising legitimate families. The answer is quite a few. Actually, medieval marriage among nobility was practical rather than romantic men married for alliances and heirs, while maintaining emotional or sexual connections elsewhere. Knights who loved queens they couldn't have often eventually married appropriate women and built functioning if not passionate domestic lives. It was considered normal, expected even, that married people's deepest emotional bonds might lie outside their marriages. I don't want a real life without you, Roland says quietly. I want the impossible thing. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to teach He stops himself. To teach Thomas to ride and fight and read. I want conversations that aren't stolen, moments filled with dread of discovery. I want everything we can't have. I know. Your throat is tight with tears you can't shed here, in public view. I want that too, but wanting doesn't change reality. You need to leave, build something good in the south, and try to find happiness somewhere other than me. We've had 3 years of impossible love. That has to be enough. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But he's already accepting it. You can see resignation settling over him, like snow covering a landscape. When do I leave? 3 weeks. He nods once, sharp and final. Then, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "Thank you for informing me, Your Majesty. I'm honoured by the King's confidence in assigning me to his brother's household." "You've earned it through loyal service," you reply in your queen voice, equally formal. "I'm certain you'll represent the crown well." You walk away then, back straight, head high, every inch the queen conducting routine business. You don't look back. You can't look back, because if you do, you'll break, and you cannot break where servants and guards might witness it. That night in your chambers, alone finally, you allow yourself to fall apart. You cry for the impossible love you're losing again. You cry for Thomas, who might never know his real father. You cry for Roland, exiled twice now because of his connection to you. You cry for yourself, trapped forever in this performance of a life. Never allowed to be authentic, never permitted to choose love over duty. 3 weeks pass too quickly and too slowly. You see Roland occasionally during his final days at court, but never alone, never with any opportunity for real goodbye. On his last morning, you watch from a tower window as he rides out with a small contingent heading south. He doesn't look back at the castle, doesn't search the windows for your face. He simply rides away, growing smaller and smaller until he disappears into the distance. And you're alone again. Truly, finally alone in ways that feel permanent now. You have Thomas. You have your duties. You have your role as queen. But you've lost the man who made you feel human, who saw past the crown to the woman underneath. You place your hand against the cold stone window and whisper what you couldn't say aloud. I love you. I will always love you. And I'm so sorry for all the ways loving me has hurt you. The stone offers no reply. The world continues turning, indifferent to one queen's heartbreak. And you turn away from the window, reconstruct your composure, and prepare to face another day of being perfectly dutiful and completely empty. Your forbidden love is over. Really, truly, finally over. And somehow, you have to figure out how to survive that ending. 5 years pass. Thomas grows from toddler to child, increasingly bright and curious and unnervingly perceptive for someone so young. The resemblances to Roland that terrified you when he was 3 fade somewhat as his features mature, or perhaps you simply stop looking for them so obsessively. Choosing sanity over constant paranoid comparison, he looks like himself now. A unique person rather than an obvious copy of either possible father. Your husband never questions his legitimacy, treats him as his cherished heir, spends increasing time teaching him statecraft and military strategy appropriate for a future king. You bear 2 more children, daughters, born 2 and 4 years after Thomas. They're definitely your husband's. The timing and circumstances leave no ambiguity. You love them fiercely. These little girls who arrived during a period when your marriage had evolved into something resembling functional partnership, if not genuine passion. Your husband is pleased sons are essential, but daughters have value too. Future marriage alliances that will strengthen the kingdom's political position. You've become, by any objective measure, an exceptionally successful queen. Your charitable works are legendary. You've endowed hospitals, supported widows, establish schools for poor children. Your management of the royal household is efficient and sophisticated, saving the treasury significant funds through careful oversight. Your political counsel to your husband is increasingly valued. He consults you on diplomatic matters, listens to your assessments of noble factions, trusts your judgment in ways he never did during those early years of marriage. You're respected, admired, considered one of the finest queens the realm has ever known, and you're profoundly, existentially lonely in ways that have nothing to do with being physically alone. You receive letters occasionally from the south, formal reports that your husband's brother sends to the court about regional matters, in which Roland is sometimes mentioned. He's done well, been promoted to captain of the household guard, distinguished himself in several skirmishes with bandits, married a local nobleman's daughter 2 years ago, a woman named Isabel who apparently comes from good family and brings useful political connections. They have an infant son. You read these updates with careful neutrality, revealing nothing to anyone about how each mention of Roland feels like a small death. He's built the life you told him to build useful, respected, with wife and child and prospects. Everything appropriate for a knight of his station. Exactly what he should have done. You're happy for him. You want him to have good things, a real life beyond the impossible love you shared. You genuinely, truly want his happiness, and it still destroys you a little to know he's found it without you. Do you remember learning that happiness and grief can coexist? That you can simultaneously celebrate someone else's joy while mourning what it means for your own story? Medieval philosophy actually had sophisticated understanding of this, theologians wrote, about how the human heart contains multitudes, how opposing emotions could be genuine at once. You embody that contradiction, genuinely pleased Roland has built something good, genuinely devastated that building something good required him to move on from you. Here's what you don't learn for years: he hasn't moved on. His marriage is dutiful, functional, politically useful, exactly like yours. He cares for Isabel in the distant, responsible way noblemen care for wives they didn't choose but will honour nonetheless. He's building a life that looks successful from outside while feeling hollow at its core. You're doing the same thing 300 miles north, both of you performing contentment while carrying the same wound that never quite heals. But you don't know this. You assume he's found peace, maybe even happiness, and you try to be glad about it while dying inside. Thomas turns 8. Old enough now for serious education beyond basic literacy. Your husband brings in scholars to teach him Latin, philosophy, mathematics, military strategy. Thomas is brilliant, quick to learn, endlessly curious, asking questions that often perplex his tutors. He has his father's determination and strategic mind. But also, and this terrifies you whenever you notice it, Roland's intellectual curiosity. That same hunger to understand ideas rather than just memorize facts. When Thomas tilts his head while thinking through a problem, you see Roland when he laughs at clever wordplay. You hear echoes when he questions assumptions instead of accepting authority blindly. You remember library conversations about Boethius and philosophy and the world being more complex than simple hierarchies. You're the only one who sees these things. Your husband notices only that his son is intelligent and promising. The tutors see an excellent student. Everyone else sees the crown prince developing appropriately. No one looks at Thomas and thinks that child might be someone else's, which means you've succeeded. You've protected your son, maintained your position, ensured his legitimacy will never be seriously questioned. The price was Roland's permanent exile and your own emotional numbness, but you've achieved what you set out to achieve. The victories feel remarkably empty. Here's a quirky detail about medieval royal education that's relevant to your situation. Princes were often educated alongside sons of noble families, creating cohorts of boys who grew up together and would later govern the kingdom together. Your husband decides to invite several promising young nobles to be educated with Thomas, including, because fate has a cruel sense of humour, Roland's son from the south. The boy arrives at court when he's 7, small and serious and unnervingly familiar in ways that make you want to scream. He has his father's eyes, that same grey-blue you've spent years trying to forget. He moves with similar grace. He's shy and thoughtful and kind to servants in ways that suggest his father's influence in his upbringing. His name is Geoffrey. You have to pretend you barely notice him. Just another nobleman's son in the cohort of boys learning alongside Thomas. You watch them become friends, Thomas and Geoffrey playing chess, studying together, practicing swordplay in the training yard. Half-brothers, possibly, growing up side by side and never knowing it. Or maybe not half-brothers at all. Maybe just 2 boys who happen to have coincidental connections to the same night. You'll never know for certain. The ambiguity, your learning, is its own special torture. Historians still argue about how many medieval rulers were actually legitimate. How many royal lineages involve children fathered by men other than their official fathers? Modern DNA testing of royal remains has revealed surprising results, genetic lines that don't match official genealogies, suggesting that queens' infidelities was more common than historical records indicate. Some scholars estimate that 5 to 15% of medieval monarchs might have had different biological fathers than recorded. The numbers are impossible to verify, but the implication is clear: successful royal adultery left no definitive evidence, which means it happened more often than anyone proved. Geoffrey stays at court for 3 years as part of Thomas's educational cohort. You maintain perfect distance. He's just another student. You treat him exactly like the other boys. But sometimes you catch yourself watching him, looking for signs of Roland in his features, in his mannerisms, in the way he approaches the world. And sometimes Geoffrey looks back at you with those grey-blue eyes, Roland's eyes, and you wonder if somehow, impossibly, he knows. Children can be perceptive about things adults think are hidden. But no, he couldn't know. He's just a boy looking at his prince's mother, the Queen, with appropriate respect and perhaps slight nervousness. When Geoffrey returns to the south after 3 years of education, you feel relief and loss in equal measure. Relief at no longer having that daily reminder of Roland. Loss because watching Geoffrey was the closest you could come to knowing anything about the man you loved. You're 30 now. You've been queen for over a decade. Your husband has greyed at the temples, grown thicker around the middle, developed the satisfied look of a man whose life has unfolded successfully. Your children are healthy and promising. Your kingdom is stable and prosperous. By every measure that matters to medieval governance, you've been extraordinarily successful. And you wake up some mornings and can't remember why you bothered. Everything you built feels like ashes in your mouth, beautiful. Impressive ashes that everyone admires, but ashes nonetheless. You're going through motions, fulfilling functions, being the perfect queen while the parts of yourself that once yearned for authentic connection have withered from disuse. Lady Catherine, your most trusted attendant, notices your melancholy. She's older now, experienced enough to be genuinely maternal rather than simply servile. One afternoon, while you're embroidering a mindless activity you engage in during political discussions, she speaks carefully. Your Majesty seems weary lately. You don't look up from your needlework. I'm a queen in my 30s with 3 children and a kingdom to help govern. Weariness is expected. I don't mean physically tired, I mean... She hesitates, choosing words carefully. Dispirited. as though you've lost something essential. You wonder if she knows, if she's guessed about Roland, about the affair that technically never progressed beyond kisses and desperate longing. But no, she's just observant enough to notice that you're hollow inside. Do you believe, you ask slowly, still focused on your embroidery, that duty is enough, that forming one's role well, serving others, doing what's expected, is that sufficient for a meaningful life? For some people, yes. For others, Lady Catherine pauses. For others, duty without joy is just slow death. You set down your embroidery and look at her directly. And what do you recommend for those in the second category who have no choice but duty, who can never pursue joy because their position requires constant sacrifice? I recommend, she says gently, finding small joys where possible. Time with children, gardens, music, prayer, books, friendships, whatever fragments of authentic feeling can be cultivated within the constraints of duty. It's good advice, practical advice, medieval women's wisdom about survival, how to endure impossible situations by finding tiny spaces for genuine self within the overwhelming demands of role and responsibility. You take her advice. You spend more time with your children, genuinely present rather than performing motherhood. You expand your gardens, finding peace in growing things. You read voraciously philosophy, poetry, histories, anything that feeds your mind. You develop genuine friendships with certain ladies in waiting. Relationships that go beyond political manoeuvring into actual human connection. It's not the passionate, transformative love you had with Roland. It's not the feeling of being completely seen and understood by someone who values your mind and heart above your function. But it's something. Small lights in darkness, fragments of meaning in an otherwise hollow existence. And you survive. Year after year, you survive. Performing your role perfectly while cultivating these small private spaces for something resembling authentic life. It's not the story you wanted, but it's the story you get, and you're learning, slowly and painfully, that sometimes survival itself is a kind of victory. The news arrives on a cold morning in late autumn, 15 years after Roland first left for the south. You're in the Great Hall reviewing petitions from regional lords when a messenger arrives, dusty from hard riding, bearing urgent correspondence from your husband's brother. The letter is addressed to the king, but you're present when he opens it, as you often are now for matters of governance. Your husband reads silently, his face darkening with each line. Damn, he mutters finally. We've lost good men in the south. Your heart stops, completely stops for a full beat before resuming at frantic pace. What happened? Major bandit incursion. Nearly a full-scale battle, my brother's forces repelled them, but casualties were significant. He scans the list of dead and wounded that accompanies the report. Several knights killed, including... He pauses, squinting at the parchment. Roland of House Beaumont, captained the defence apparently, died heroically holding a critical position while others retreated to regroup. The world narrows to a single point. You hear your husband's words, but they make no sense, like he's speaking a foreign language you've forgotten how to translate. Roland, dead, died heroically. Those words shouldn't connect, shouldn't form coherent meaning, because Roland can't be dead. He exists somewhere in the south, living his dutiful life, raising his son, serving your husband's brother. He's alive because the alternative is unthinkable. Your Majesty, Lady Catherine is beside you suddenly, her hand on your arm, steadying. Are you unwell? You realise you've swayed, gone pale, given some physical indication of distress. You force yourself to breathe, to reconstruct your queenly composure, even as everything inside you is screaming. Forgive me. You manage, your voice surprisingly steady considering you're dying inside. I felt suddenly dizzy. Perhaps I rose too quickly this morning. It's a plausible excuse women are expected to have mysterious physical ailments that come and go without explanation. Your husband barely notices, already dictating a response to his brother, discussing sending additional troops to reinforce the southern defences. You sit through the entire meeting somehow, nodding at appropriate moments, even contributing strategic suggestions, while internally you're shattering into pieces so small they'll never be reassembled. Roland is dead. The man you loved, the man you sent away to keep him safe, died fighting bandits 300 miles from you. He died defending land and people, doing his duty, being the kind of knight who holds critical positions so others can survive. He died heroically, which should make you proud, but instead makes you want to scream, because what good is heroism when it means he's gone? You excuse yourself as soon as the meeting ends, claiming your dizziness persists, and flee to the chapel. It's the only place you can be alone, where emotional displays can be attributed to religious fervour rather than personal grief. You kneel before the altar and finally let yourself break. You cry silently, desperately, your body shaking with sobs you can't voice aloud because even here someone might overhear. You cry for Roland, for the life he should have had, for the decades he was robbed of. You cry for yourself, for the knowledge that you'll never see him again, never speak to him again, that the man who understood you completely is simply gone from the world. You cry for Thomas, who might be Roland's son and will never know his real father. You cry for Geoffrey, definitely Roland's son, who lost his father in battle. You cry for the fundamental injustice of it all, that you sent Roland away to keep him safe, and he died anyway, that you sacrificed your happiness and his for duty and stability, and it didn't even achieve the basic goal of keeping him alive, that you spent 15 years convincing yourself the separation was necessary and noble, and now you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that all those years you could have had together, even if stolen fragments, even if dangerous, are simply gone, erased, unrecoverable. Here's what medieval people believed about death and the afterlife: souls went to heaven, hell, or purgatory, depending on the state of their souls at death. Knights who died in service were generally assumed to achieve heaven, their duty fulfilled honourably. You want to believe that Roland is in heaven, at peace, beyond suffering, but you also wonder, with bitter theology, whether God punishes souls for forbidden love, whether the sin of adultery, even unconsummated adultery, even love that chose duty over desire, condemns him to purgatory or worse. You pray desperately for his soul, bargaining with God in ways that probably aren't theologically sound. Take my suffering, my penance, my remaining years of life, just let him be at peace. Let him know, wherever he is, that he was loved, that his life mattered beyond military service and duty, that one person saw him completely and cherished what she saw. Hours pass in the chapel. Eventually, Lady Catherine finds you, gently insisting you return to your chambers, that you're exhausted and need rest. You allow yourself to be led away, grateful for her discretion in not asking why the death of one minor knight has affected the Queen so profoundly. That night, you write a letter, not to anyone, just writing to process grief, to say everything you never could say while Roland lived. You write about loving him, about the garden meetings and library conversations and chapel encounters. You write about Thomas and the terrible uncertainty about paternity. You write about sending Roland away to keep him safe and how that decision haunts you now that safety meant nothing in the end. You write about regretting everything except knowing him, about how those few months of genuine connection were worth all the years of lonely performance that followed. You write for hours, filling pages with everything forbidden and true. Then you burn it all. watching the parchment curl and blacken, smoke carrying your words into nothing. You cannot keep evidence of these feelings. Even dead, Roland could still ruin you if anyone discovered the depth of your attachment. But burning the letter doesn't erase the grief. You carry it like a stone in your chest, heavy and cold and permanent. The official mourning period for fallen knights is brief memorial services for the dead, prayers for their souls, honours rendered to their sacrifice. Roland's name is among those spoken in the cathedral during the memorial mass. You sit in the Queen's seat, face composed, while the priest intones his name along with the other dead. Nobody watching you would guess that hearing his name spoken aloud as part of the deceased makes you want to howl with grief. Your husband commissions a monument to the fallen knights, a stone memorial in the cathedral with all their names carved into it. Roland's name will be there forever, preserved in stone, a minor footnote in the kingdom's military history. Nobody will remember him particularly. He wasn't famous, wasn't high-ranking enough to warrant individual remembrance. He'll be just one name among many, a faithful knight who died in service. Only you will remember him as more than that. Only you know about his intelligence, his kindness, his ability to see past surfaces to essential truths. Only you know how he laughed at clever wordplay, how he tilted his head when thinking, how his eyes saw you as a person rather than a function. And that knowledge dies with you, because you can never speak it aloud. Historians still argue about how to evaluate forbidden love in medieval contexts. Some scholars see affairs as simple moral failures, betrayals of marriage vows and social order that deserved punishment. Others recognize the impossible positions medieval women occupied married without choice, expected to perform affection they didn't feel, denied autonomy over their own hearts and bodies. These scholars see affairs as understandable human responses to dehumanizing circumstances, not moral failings, but desperate attempts to claim some small space for authentic feeling within systems designed to eliminate personal choice. You don't know which interpretation is correct. You just know that loving Roland was simultaneously the most alive you've ever felt and the source of your deepest, most enduring pain. You know that choosing duty over love saved your position but hollowed out your soul. You know that he's dead now, beyond reach, and you have to continue living in this half-life without even the distant knowledge that he exists somewhere in the world. Geoffrey returns to court 2 years after his father's death. Now 15 and nearly finished with his education, he's quieter than before, marked by grief in ways he doesn't discuss. You want to comfort him, to tell him his father was extraordinary, to share stories that might preserve Roland's memory, but you can't. You're just the Queen, and he's just another nobleman's son. Your grief must remain private, unspoken, invisible. Thomas is 13 now, growing into young manhood, increasingly responsible and capable. Your husband is grooming him intensively for eventual kingship, involving him in governance, teaching him statecraft. Thomas has your husband's strategic mind and dedication to duty. He also has, and you notice this with bittersweet ache, Roland's curiosity about ideas, his tendency to question assumptions, his kindness to people below his station. Whether Thomas is biologically your husband's son or Roland's, he's become exactly the kind of prince the kingdom needs: intelligent, thoughtful, capable. You've succeeded in raising him well, protecting him, ensuring his position is secure, but watching him grow increasingly into his own person, strong and good and promising, you wonder what Roland would think if he could see him. Would he recognize himself in Thomas's gestures? Would he feel pride, or grief, or both at once? You'll never know. Roland is gone. And with him went any possibility of answers to the questions that have haunted you for over a decade. You're 35 now. You have perhaps 20 or 30 more years of life ahead of you if you're fortunate with health. 20 or 30 more years of performing queenly duties while carrying this grief. 20 or 30 more years of being successful, admired, effective, and completely hollow inside. You wonder sometimes if the loneliness you felt before Roland was actually easier than the loneliness you feel now. Before, you didn't know what you were missing. Now you know exactly what genuine connection feels like, and you know you'll never experience it again. Lady Catherine finds you in the gardens one afternoon, staring at the herbs that still grow in neat rows exactly where they grew 15 years ago when you first kissed Roland in this space. "Your Majesty," she says gently, "you cannot grieve forever. I'm not grieving. You lie automatically. I'm simply contemplative." You've been contemplative for 2 years. She sits beside you uninvited, a liberty only a trusted servant of decades would take. Whoever he was, whatever he meant to you, he would want you to live, not just exist. So she knows, or suspects, has perhaps known for years. You should probably feel alarmed, but instead you just feel tired. It doesn't matter what he would want, you say quietly. He's dead. I'm here. I have duties. That's all there is. Is it? Lady Catherine challenges gently. Your Majesty, you've given everything to duty. Your youth, your desires, your authentic self. You've been a perfect queen for 15 years. Surely there's space now for some small measure of personal peace. You want to believe her, but you don't know how to find peace when the person who made you feel seen is gone. You don't know how to rebuild meaning from the rubble of this loss. I'll try. You tell her, not believing it but recognizing she means well. And you do try. You continue cultivating those small joys, time with your children, your gardens, your reading, your charitable works. You try to find meaning in duty itself, to believe that serving the kingdom well is sufficient purpose. Some days, you almost succeed. You have moments of genuine contentment, brief periods when the grief recedes enough to allow other feelings. But mostly, you survive. You continue being the perfect queen everyone admires while carrying grief like a secret wound that never quite heals, loving a dead man who's becoming memory and myth, even in your own mind. And you wonder, late at night when sleep won't come, if this is what the rest of your life will be, an endless performance of competence and grace, while inside you remain forever in that garden 15 years ago, kissing a man who saw you as human, before duty demanded you sacrifice everything authentic for the sake of appearances. The past cannot be changed, the dead cannot return, and queens, above all others, must learn to live with impossible losses while never letting anyone see them break. 20 years have passed since Roland died, and you're 55 years old now, an impressive age for a medieval woman, especially one who's survived childbirth 3 times and the endless stresses of queenship. Your husband is 69, increasingly frail, leaving more and more governance in your capable hands and in Thomas's, who at 33 is effectively ruling already, preparing for the crown he'll formally inherit when his father dies. Thomas has married a princess from a neighbouring kingdom, a political alliance that strengthened borders and opened trade routes. They have 4 children, your grandchildren, who fill the castle with noise and life. Your daughters made equally advantageous marriages, spreading your family's influence across the region. By every objective measure, your legacy is secure. You've been an exceptional queen, and history will remember you as such. But history, you've learned, remembers so little of what actually matters. Your husband dies peacefully in his sleep one winter morning, and you genuinely mourn him not with the devastating grief you felt for Roland, but with real sorrow nonetheless. He was never cruel, never the monster some medieval kings were to their wives. He was simply limited, emotionally distant, a man who valued you as a functional partner but never quite as a person. You spent 40 years married to him, built a life and kingdom and family together, and there's grief in that ending even when the relationship was never what you wanted it to be. The funeral is magnificent 3 days of mourning. Nobles from across the kingdom paying respects, masses said for his soul. You stand beside Thomas during the ceremonies, the Queen Mother now rather than the reigning queen, and you feel the weight of decades settling on your shoulders. So many years, so many performances, so much duty fulfilled while your authentic self shrank smaller and smaller until it nearly disappeared. Thomas is crowned within a month, a smooth transition of power that reflects the stability you and your husband built. Your new daughter-in-law becomes queen, and you gracefully step into the role of dowager queen, still influential, still respected, but no longer bearing the primary burden of queenship. It's strange. This shift. You've been queen for 40 years. It's been your entire identity for most of your adult life. Suddenly you're something else, something less defined. And in that undefined space, you finally have time to think, to remember, to process everything you've suppressed for decades in service of duty. You spend more time alone now, which is a luxury you rarely had as reigning queen. You walk in the gardens, those same gardens where you first kissed Roland 40 years ago. The herb beds have been replanted countless times, but the fountain still stands, water still trickling from the lion's mouth. You sit on the stone bench where you once sat beside him, having conversations that made you feel human, and you let yourself remember without the constant fear of discovery. Here's what you've learned over decades of reflection. Forbidden love doesn't diminish with time the way people claim. It doesn't fade into comfortable nostalgia or distant memory. Instead, it ossifies, becomes a permanent part of your internal landscape, a room in your heart that remains furnished exactly as it was 40 years ago, preserved perfectly because you could never move forward from it. You still love Roland, present tense, even though he's been dead for 20 years, and because you love the man he was, the connection you shared, the version of yourself you were able to be with him. That love hasn't faded, it's simply become historical, a permanent fact about who you are rather than an active force in your life. Thomas comes to visit you one afternoon in your private chambers. He's a good son, attentive even now that he's king and carrying enormous responsibilities. He brings wine, settles into a chair across from you, and for a while you just sit in companionable silence. "I've been reading old chronicles," he says finally. "Records from grandfather's reign, accounts of court life when I was young." Something in his tone makes you wary. "Oh, there are mentions of rumours, vague suggestions about the Queen and a certain night. Nothing concrete, nothing that names anyone specifically, but enough that I can piece together a story if I'm paying attention." He looks at you directly, his grey-blue eyes Roland's eyes. You've always thought, though you can never be certain, gentle and understanding. Did you love him, whoever he was? You could deny it. Even now, even with your husband dead and yourself removed from power, you could maintain the performance of perfect virtue. But you're tired. So tired of pretending. And Thomas is your son, the best thing you ever created regardless of his paternity. If anyone deserves truth, it's him. "Yes," you say simply. "I loved him, completely, desperately, impossibly. Was he my father?" The question you've dreaded for 33 years, spoken aloud finally in this quiet chamber. "I don't know." You answer honestly. The timing was ambiguous. You could be your father's son, the man who raised you, who you called father, or you could be... You trail off, unable to quite finish. "Roland of House Beaumont. Thomas supplies. I know the name. I've read the records." Knight in grandfather's service sent to the northern garrison, recalled to court, eventually posted south where he died in battle, and his son Geoffrey was part of my childhood cohort, which means you had to see him regularly, had to be reminded. He stops, understanding dawning in his expression. That must have been torturous. You laugh, though it comes out slightly broken. Everything about that situation was torturous. Loving someone I couldn't have, sending him away to protect all of us, never knowing if you were his son, watching you grow up looking for resemblances, terrified someone else would notice. And then he died. And I had to grieve privately while performing public indifference because admitting I cared would have destroyed everything we'd protected for so long. "I'm sorry," Thomas says softly. "I'm sorry you had to carry that alone for so many years." Historians still argue about how many children throughout history grew up not knowing their real parentage, raised by men who believed they were biological fathers. Modern DNA testing has revealed surprising truths about royal lineages, genetic evidence that contradicts official genealogies, proving that medieval affairs resulted in children whose true paternity remained hidden. Some estimates suggest 5 to 15% of people throughout history have been raised by men who weren't their biological fathers. The numbers might be higher in royal courts, where women had both motivation and opportunity for affairs. "If he was my father," Thomas continues carefully, "does that make me illegitimate? Should I not be king?" You consider this question seriously, because he deserves serious engagement. Legally, no. You were born in wedlock, acknowledged by the king as his son, raised as legitimate heir. Medieval law is clear: a child born in marriage is legitimate regardless of biological reality. But more importantly, you pause, choosing words carefully. Your father, the man who raised you, loved you, prepared you for kingship, passed his crown to you legitimately. Roland, if he was your biological father, would have wanted exactly this for you. He was a good man who understood duty, who would never have wanted his connection to you to threaten your position. You really loved him. It's not a question, just observation. I really loved him. I love him still. Though he's been dead 20 years, I loved your father too. In a different way, partnership and respect, if not passion. I loved all of you, my children, fiercely and completely. Hearts are larger than people imagine. They can hold multiple truths simultaneously. Thomas stands, comes to kneel beside your chair, takes your hands in his. Thank you for telling me the truth. And for the record, I don't care whose son I am biologically. You were an excellent mother. Grandfather was a good father. And if there was another man who contributed to my existence and who you loved, I'm grateful that you knew love, even if it was forbidden and painful. You cry then not the devastating sobs of acute grief, but gentler tears of relief and release. Thomas embraces you, and you hold your son, whoever's biological child he is. He's yours in every way that matters, and feel some small portion of the burden you've carried for 40 years finally lift. Later, alone again. You sit at your window watching the sunset over the castle grounds. You're 55 years old. You've been queen, wife, mother, advisor, the foundation upon which kingdom stability was built. You've succeeded at every task assigned to you by birth and circumstance. And you've loved, forbidden, impossible, devastating love that shaped you in ways nothing else could. That affair, those few months of stolen moments 40 years ago, taught you what it felt like to be seen completely. Valued for your mind and heart rather than your function. It gave you something authentic in a life constructed almost entirely of performance. Was it worth it? The question is almost meaningless. You didn't choose to fall in love with Roland any more than you chose your royal birth. It happened to you, and you responded as best you could, protecting your children, maintaining your position, surviving impossible circumstances while carrying grief and longing that never quite faded. Here's what you know now that you didn't know at 18 when you married, at 20 when you met Roland, at 25 when you sent him away, at 35 when you learned he'd died. Life is rarely the stories we're told to expect. The romantic ballads lie love doesn't conquer all. Passion doesn't override duty. Forbidden desire doesn't lead to happy endings, but love matters anyway. Connection matters. Those brief moments of genuine human recognition matter, even when they can't be sustained, even when they end in loss. You loved Roland. He loved you. You created something real and beautiful in circumstances designed to prevent exactly that. And whether that love produced a child who became king, or whether it remained confined to stolen moments and letters and grief, it existed. It mattered. It made you human in ways that pure duty never could. The sun sets completely, darkness settling over the kingdom, your kingdom, shaped by decades of your labour and sacrifice and careful manoeuvring. Your son's kingdom now, but still reflecting your influence in its stability and prosperity. You're tired. So tired from carrying secrets and grief and duty for 40 years. But you survived. You've endured impossibly difficult circumstances with grace and strength and strategic brilliance. You protected everyone who depended on you while maintaining just enough authentic self to remember who you were beneath the crown. Tomorrow you'll wake and continue being the Dowager Queen, performing your reduced but still important role. You'll advise Thomas, spend time with grandchildren, manage your charitable works, maintain the dignity expected of your position. But tonight, in this quiet moment, you let yourself be simply a woman who loved and lost, who survived impossible circumstances, who did her duty while never quite forgetting what it felt like to be seen as human rather than function. You close your eyes finally, the memories settling around you like a familiar blanket, bittersweet and heavy and somehow comforting. The story of your forbidden love didn't end the way romantic ballads promised. It ended with separation, death, decades of grief and uncertain paternity. It ended with duty triumphant and desire sublimated, and survival achieved at enormous personal cost. But it also ended with you still here, still remembering, still carrying the knowledge that once, 40 years ago, you were completely seen and valued by someone who understood you. That knowledge sustained you through decades of performance. It reminded you, even in your darkest moments, that underneath the queenly role lived an actual human being with desires and needs and capacity for profound connection. Medieval queens weren't supposed to be human. They were supposed to be symbols, functions, diplomatic tools, producers of heirs. But you were human anyway. You loved anyway. You claimed some small space for authentic feeling in a life designed to eliminate personal choice. And now, at 55, you can finally allow yourself to believe that was enough. Not what you wanted, not the happy ending you'd have chosen, but enough. You survived. You loved. You protected those who depended on you. You built something lasting, even while carrying private grief that never fully healed. The night deepens around you. Somewhere in the castle, Thomas governs. Your grandchildren sleep. Life continues its eternal patterns. And you, the Dowager Queen, the woman who loved her knight she couldn't have, settle into your chair and let yourself drift towards sleep. In your dreams, you're young again, standing in a garden where herbs grow in neat rows. A man with grey-blue eyes and a thoughtful expression takes your hand. "I see you," he says, and you believe him. For these few dream moments, you're not a queen or a function or a duty. You're just yourself, completely seen, absolutely loved. It's only a dream. But dreams, you've learned, can sustain you when reality offers nothing but duty and loss. So you hold on to the dream, carrying it with you into sleep, letting it remind you that once, however briefly, however impossibly, you lived fully, loved completely, and knew what it felt like to be human. The story of your forbidden love wasn't the ballad you wanted, but it was yours. And after 40 years of carrying it silently, you can finally rest in the knowledge that it mattered. You mattered. The love was real, and sometimes, in a life defined by duty and sacrifice, that small truth is enough to sustain a weary heart through the dark hours until dawn. Sleep well, Queen. You've earned it. Rest now in the knowledge that you survived impossibly difficult circumstances with grace, strength, and just enough humanity to remember who you were beneath the crown. Your story is complete, and though history will remember only the outlined successful queen, devoted mother, wise advisor, you'll always know the deeper truth beneath those official facts. You loved, you lost, you survived, and that perhaps is the most human story of all.